Okay, background and history. The Federalist Papers is a collection of 85 articles and essays written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay under the collective pseudonym Publius, Public Supermarkets. Publius, is that how you pronounce it? I'm curious, actually.
I haven't been any place.
Is it Publius or Publius?
So make sure to stay tuned to the channel if you enjoy learning
I hate
about
this
those.
stupid fucking channel.
In English, it is said as Publius.
Publius?
Publius, it's easy. While in Latin, that would be said more as Publius. But
Publius. Publius. We're gonna go with Publius. Wait, you had a website for this. True, we did.
This is a way of learning how we might differ from Publius, which is just fine.
Publius. Publius it is. A term about the ratification of the Constitution of the United States. The collection was commonly known as the Federalist until the name, the Federalist Papers, emerged in the 20th century. The first 77 of these essays were published serially in the independent journal, the New York Packet, and the Daily Advertiser between October 1787 and April of 1788. A compilation of these 77 essays and 8 others were published in 2 volumes as The Federalist, a collection of essays written in favor of the new Constitution as agreed upon by the Federal Convention, September 17th, 1787. Holy shit, they were already naming their books like post-rock albums. By publishing firm J. and A. McLean in March and May 1788. The last 8 papers, numbers 78 through 85, were republished in the New York newspapers between June 14th and August 16th, 1788. The authors of The Federalist intended to influence the voters to ratify the Constitution. In Federalist number 1, they explicitly set that debate in broad political terms. In Federalist number 10, okay, we don't need to go through these because we'll read them. The Federal Convention, the Constitutional Convention, sent the proposed Constitution to the Confederation Congress, which in turn submitted it to the states for ratification at the end of September 1787. On September 27th, 1787, Cato first appeared in the New York press criticizing the proposition. Brutus followed on October 18th, 1787. Do you think all these guys, when they were writing to the fucking newspapers, do you think they were all wearing the fucking, the Guy Fawkes masks? Actual fucking losers. These and other articles and public letters critical of the new Constitution would eventually become known as the Anti-Federalist Papers. In response, Alexander Hamilton decided to launch a measured defense and extensive explanation of the proposed Constitution to the people of the state of New York. He wrote in Federalist number 1 that the series would endeavor to give a satisfactory answer to all of the objections which shall have made their appearance that may seem to have any claim to your attention. Hamilton recruited collaborators for the project. He enlisted John Jay, who, after 4 essays, fell ill and contributed only 1 more essay, loser. Jay also distilled his case into a pamphlet in the spring of 1788 and addressed to the people of the state of New York. Hamilton cited it approvingly in Federalist number 85. James Madison, president of New York, as a Virginia delegate to the Confederation Congress, was recruited by Hamilton and Jay and became Hamilton's primary collaborator. Governor Morris and William Duer were also considered. However, Morris turned down the invitation and Hamilton rejected 3 essays written by Duer. Duer, I don't know if I'm probably this right. Duer later wrote in support of the 3 Federalist authors under the name Philo or Philo Publius, meaning either friend of the people or friend of Hamilton, based on Hamilton's pen name, Publius. Hamilton chose the pseudonym name Publius, while many other pieces representing both sides of the constitutional debate were written under Roman names. Historian Albert Furtwängler, contends that Publius was a cut above Caesar or Brutus or even Cato. At the time of publication, the authors of the Federalist Papers attempted to hide their identities due to Hamilton and Madison having attended the convention. Astute observers, however, correctly discerned the identities of Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. Establishing authorial authenticity of the essays that constitute the Federalist Papers has not always been clear. After Hamilton's death in 1804, a list emerged claiming that he alone had written 2/3 of the Federalist essays. Some believe that several of these essays were written by Madison. The scholarly detective work of Douglas Adair in 1944 postulated the following assignments of authorship, corroborated in 1964 by a computer analysis of the text. Federalist Papers were written to support the ratification of the Constitution, specifically in New York. Whether they succeeded in that mission is questionable. Separate ratification proceedings took place in each state, and the essays were not reliably reprinted outside of New York. Furthermore, by the time the series was well underway, a number of important states had already ratified it, for instance, Pennsylvania on December 12th. New York held out until July 26th. Certainly, the Federalist was more important there than anywhere else, but Furtwängler argues that it could hardly rival other major forces in the ratification contest. Specifically, these forces included the personal influence of well-known Federalists, for instance, Hamilton and Jay, and anti-Federalists, including Governor George Clinton. Further, by the time New York came to a vote, 10 states had already ratified the Constitution and it had thus already passed. Only 9 states had to ratify it for the new government to be established. Among them, the ratification by Virginia, the 10th state, placed pressure on New York to ratify. In light of that, Furtwängler observes, New York's refusal would make that state an odd outsider. Only 19 Federalists were elected to New York's ratification convention, compared to the anti-Federalists' 46 delegates. While New York did indeed ratify the Constitution on July 26th, the lack of public support for pro-Constitution Federalists has led historian John Kaminsky to suggest that the impact of the Federalists on New York citizens was negligible. As for Virginia, which ratified the Constitution only at its convention on June 25th, Hamilton writes in a letter to Madison that the collected edition of the Federalist had been sent to Virginia. Furtwängler presumes that it was an act as a debater's handbook for the convention there, though he claims that this indirect influence would be a dubious distinction. Okay, some background. Do I want a note for every single paper, or do I just want... Or should I just put them all on one big note? Let's see. Oh, we could do 10 of these per day, probably. Maybe? Yeah, fuck it, why not? Fuck, how did you make what's this? Okay. Well, I guess I'll just note important things, I guess. Okay, as we read these, I'll try to break down concepts that I understand, and we'll look at things we don't understand. I'll probably just try to explain paragraph by paragraph, okay? For why these things are important, my U.S. history knowledge is not that great. Anything that I learned before this year, actually, we'll just say is not that great. But I believe there was a constitutional convention in the United States where a constitution was drafted with the intention of creating a strong federal government that would be more able to govern, basically, than what we had prior to that, which was the Articles of Confederation. A lot of people attended these constitutional conventions, and then the convention, and then afterwards, the goal was you needed all the states to ratify. Well, not all of them. You only needed, what did I say, 9 of them, to ratify the Constitution, saying, okay, fine, we'll all be part of a bigger country, basically. And part of the people that were at, or some of the people that were at that constitutional convention are the authors of a lot of these Federalist Papers. The reason why what they write in the Federalist Papers is important is twofold. One reason can be important, and it's what everybody cites, but I actually think it's the minor reason. And then there's a second incredibly important reason, okay? The first reason that people cite is because it gives you some insight into what they felt and what they thought and what their intention was when they were writing the Constitution. This is like interesting, I think, to know. It's like, okay, cool. And it's what usually people say, don't you want to know what they thought when they wrote it? The second point that I think is far more interesting is that the federal government that we have in the United States and the way that our government is formed, okay, was not by random chance and not by organic evolution out of pre-existing structures. It was a bunch of people that came together that studied the prior governments, the prior republics, the prior democracies, and they saw what worked and they saw what didn't work. And from these ideas, they tried to put together a government that kept like the strongest parts of a strong and vigorous king and executive, and the strongest parts of like a debating republic that represents the people, and the strongest parts of like of all these different things to put together a government that worked as effectively as possible. Something that was like powerful but still guaranteed individual rights. Something that could function as a federal government without infringing on the state's ability to operate right. Nothing in our government is there randomly or by chance. And whatever lessons from history these guys learned, in the 18th century are still there for us to learn. It's not like we've discovered or radically revamped our view of how, the Romans or the Greeks or, the British governed or whatever, or at least my understanding is we haven't. So it's good to, even not as like a U.S. history course, it's just good to understand like, oh, these are how other governments have functioned. These are why things are done as they are in our government. It's not random. There's reasons why. But yeah. Okay. The first author is Alexander Hamilton, Federalist number 1. To the people of the state of New York, after an unequivocal experience of the inefficiency of the subsisting federal government, you are called upon to deliberate on a new constitution for the United States of America. The subject speaks its own importance, comprehending in its consequences nothing less than the existence of the Union, the safety and welfare of the parts of which it is composed, the fate of an empire in many respects the most interesting in the world. This is a very, also, keep in mind when this is being written, this is a very presumptuous statement because the United States means fuck all to the world right now. It's a colony in the Americas. They had a big Revolutionary War that a bunch of other people got drafted. This is a pretty presumptuous statement, right? Who the fuck are you? America? Okay. It has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country, by their conduct and example, to decide the important question of whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. Oh my God. Damn, it feels like I pre-read this. But yes, so they're coming together to form an explicit government, not just like randomly like, oh, well, this guy's a king or these guys are nobles and this is kind of what they're doing. It's not what we're doing, right? It's like, can we come together and think up? Can we theory craft the perfect government, right? Can we theory craft a really good government? If there be any truth in the remark, the crisis at which we are arrived may with propriety be regarded as the era in which that decision is to be made, and a wrong decision of the part we shall act may, in this view, deserve to be considered as the general misfortune of mankind. If we fuck up, maybe this is the only time somebody can sit down and make a whole government, and if we fuck it up, no one's going to do it in the future. And they did. We did make a good government. We were the world leader for a long time, until maybe 5 days ago. This idea will add the inducements of philanthropy to those of patriotism to heighten the solicitude which all considerate and good men must feel for the event. Basically, we should all be interested, I think, in the outcome of this, right? Happy will it be if our choice should be directed by a judicious estimate of our true interests, unperplexed and unbiased by considerations not connected with the public good. We're doing these things not to make an aristocracy? And that's an aristocratic government, not an oligarchy, not a monarchy, but something for the public good, for the public. But this is a thing more ardently to be wished than seriously to be expected. The plan offered to our deliberations affects too many particular interests, innovates upon too many local institutions, not to involve in its discussion a variety of objects foreign to its merits, and of views, passions, and prejudices little favorable to the discovery of truth. Man, what a guy. This is a thing more ardently to be wished than seriously to be expected. It takes a lot of work to build a good government, right? Like, are you really going to make, like, you want to make a government that represents the public interests of all the different people? Like, yeah, keep dreaming, dipshit. Like, you really expect this to ever happen? Is essentially what he's saying here, right? There's way too many interests involved. You're trying to change way too many local institutions. Like, there's no, like, you really think that these types of discussion will lead you to the discovery of truth? Interesting. That's why people don't really realize this, but Alexander Hamilton was one of the guys that first came out against Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter. Did you know that? Among the most formidable of the obstacles which the new Constitution will have to encounter may readily be distinguished the obvious interest of a certain class of men in every state, in every state to resist all changes which may hazard a diminution of the power, emolument, and consequence of the offices they hold under the state establishments, and the perverted ambition of another class of men who will either hope to aggrandize themselves by the confusions of their country, or will flatter themselves with fairer prospects of elevation from the subdivision of the empire into several partial confederacies than from its union under one government, right? So, what's going to fuck us up when we're trying to make a new constitution, right? Well, obviously, it's going to be the people who are already holding a lot of power who are going to have to give some of that power up, right? Which you do. As a state, you're going to have to give some power up to a new federal government. That's why a lot of people don't want to join a federal government. Fuck you. You're going to come in, wow, we just fought a revolutionary war against the King Britain, and now you want to make a king federal government? What a horrible idea, right? Some people would have to give up power. Other people might be capitalizing on the separation of our states into different things, and they can have, because of the subdivision of the empire into several partial confederacies, they might have more power than they would under a unionized federal government, right? It is not, however, my design to dwell upon observations of this nature. I am well aware that it would be disingenuous to resolve indiscriminately the opposition of any set of men, merely because their situations might subject them to suspicion, into interested or ambitious views. He's not just trying to write people's opinions off immediately, right? It would be disingenuous to try to say immediately, oh, obviously you're against me, right? Oh, so he's saying I have to argue for this, right? He's saying, listen, you obviously want to hold on to your power. Obviously, you're interested in that. But he's saying, but listen, I understand that. I'm not going to discount your arguments just because of that, right? I'm going to engage with the subject matter. We'll engage with the material, right? Candor will oblige us to admit that even such men may be actuated by upright intentions, and it cannot be doubted that much of the opposition which has made its appearance, or may hereafter make its appearance, will spring from sources, blameless at least, if not respectable, the honest errors of minds led astray by preconceived jealousies and fears. People might have like good incentives to be evil, but they also could just be like wrong. They could be fucked up. They might be incorrect about things. People make mistakes. Even people who are predisposed to gain from not having a federal government could still make really good arguments for why we wouldn't have a federal government. So numerous indeed and so powerful are the causes which serve to give a false bias to the judgment that we, upon many occasions, see wise and good men on the wrong as well as on the right side of questions of the first magnitude to society. This circumstance, if duly attended to, would furnish a lesson of moderation to those who are ever so much persuaded of their being in the right in any controversy. So listen, anybody can fuck up, and maybe that means you should like chill a little bit, have a little bit less conviction, be a little bit less 100% sure on a particular thing, because anybody can make a mistake. And a further reason for caution in this respect might be drawn from the reflection that we are not always sure that those who advocate the truth are influenced by purer principles than their antagonists. Different people who are both influenced by good things can come to different conclusions, right? Ambition, avarice, personal animosity, party opposition, and many other motives not more laudable than these are apt to operate as well upon those who support as those who oppose the right side of a question. You could be right for the wrong reasons. Were there not even these inducements to moderation, nothing could be more ill-judged than that intolerant spirit which has, at all times, characterized political parties. One thing we'll probably find when reading through these, I don't remember Hamilton particularly, but a lot of the Founding Fathers were not fans of political parties. Yeah, but for in politics, as in religion, it is equally absurd to aim at making proselytes by fire and sword. Heresies in either can rarely be cured by persecution. You have to change people's minds by arguing against them, not by killing them, right? And yet, however just these sentiments will be allowed to be, and yet, however just these sentiments will be allowed to be, we have already sufficient indications that it will happen in this, as in all former cases of great national discussion. A torrent of angry and malignant passions will be let loose. To judge from the conduct of the opposite parties, we shall be led to conclude that they will mutually hope to evince the justness of their opinions, and to increase the number of their converts by the loudness of their declamations and the bitterness of their invectives. An enlightened zeal for the energy and efficiency of government will be stigmatized as the offspring of a temper fond of despotic power and hostile to the principles of liberty. An over-scrupulous jealousy of danger to the rights of the people, which is more commonly the fault of the head than of the heart, will be represented as mere pretense and artifice, the stale bait for popularity at the expense of the public good. Hold on. Everybody's basically going to be so impassioned about these arguments that it's going to be very easy to conclude the other side is acting with evil, basically, I guess. It will be forgotten, on the one hand, that jealousy is the usual concomitant of love, and that the noble enthusiasm of liberty is apt to be infected with a spirit of narrow and illiberal distrust. On the other hand, it will be equally forgotten that the vigor of government is essential to the security of liberty, that in the contemplation of a sound and well-informed judgment, their interest can never be separated, and that a dangerous ambition more often lurks behind the specious mask of zeal for the rights of the people than under the forbidden appearance of zeal for the firmness and efficiency of government. History will teach us that the former has found a much more certain road to the induction of despotism than the latter, and that those men who have overturned the liberties of republics, the greatest number have begun their career by paying an obsequious court to the people, commencing demagogues and ending tyrants. What's court to the people? Is this like a obedient or attentive to the excessive or servile nature? A lot of feelings, emotions, and passions can run hand in hand, like good things and bad things can run hand in hand. There are some people who might use who might use arguments of free speech to spread lies. There might be people who say that they have a mask of zeal for the rights of the people, but there could be a dangerous ambition that's lurking behind that, right? Essentially, yeah. Obsequious. There you go. In the course of the preceding observations, I have had an eye, my fellow citizens, to putting you upon your guard against all attempts from whatever quarter to influence your decision in a matter of the utmost moment to your welfare by any impressions other than those which may result from the evidence of truth. You will, no doubt, at the same time, have collected from the general scope of them that they proceed from a source not unfriendly to the new Constitution. Yes, my countrymen, I own to you that, after having given it an attentive consideration, I am clearly of opinion it is your interest to adopt it. I am convinced that this is the safest course for your liberty, your dignity, and your happiness. He's basically saying, like, yeah, listen, obviously I'm a biased party. Literally a biased party that's writing this. I am in favor of the new Constitution. Just letting you know that right now. Yeah. I affect not reserves, which I do not feel. I will not amuse you with an appearance of deliberation when I have decided. No fake centrism. I frankly acknowledge to you my convictions, and I will freely lay before you the reasons on which they are founded. The consciousness of good intentions disdains ambiguity. I shall not, however, multiply professions on this head. My motives must remain in the depository of my own breast. My arguments will be open to all and may be judged by all. They shall at least be offered in a spirit which will not disgrace the cause of truth. I propose in a series of papers to discuss the following interesting particulars: the utility of the Union to your political prosperity, the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve that Union, the necessity of a government at least equally energetic with the one proposed, to the attainment of this object, the conformity of the proposed Constitution to the true principles of Republican government, its analogy to your own state constitution, and lastly, the additional security which its adoption will afford to the preservation of that species of government, to liberty and to prosperity. So basically, the arguments are going to be, your current confederation sucks. I'm going to argue that you have an insufficient present confederation that does not preserve a union that's necessary, that will be able to act as energetically as the one that he's proposing, okay? That the attainment of the current object it coincides with the true principles of Republican government, and it's analogous to all of the state constitutions, which the people obviously like. They're the constitution of every state. And then the additional security will be granted basically to the country if everybody adopts the current constitution. It'll make everybody's lives better insofar as that it secures more liberty and prosperity, right? Or property, sorry. In the progress of this discussion, I shall endeavor to give a satisfactory answer to all the objections which shall have made their appearance that may seem to have any claim to your attention. It may perhaps be thought superfluous to offer arguments to prove the utility of the Union, a point, no doubt, deeply engraved on the hearts of the great body of the people in every state, and one which it may be imagined has no adversaries. But the fact is that we already hear it whispered in the private circles of those who oppose the new Constitution that the 13 states are of too great extent for any general system, and that we must of necessity resort to separate confederacies of distinct portions of the whole. So basically, like, I'm sure like a lot of us are thinking like, man, we're a union, you know, we're so cool. We're beating the British and all this cool shit. But I mean, like, in terms of being a strong whole country, I don't know, will all the states be on board with it? Apparently, they feel like not everybody is on board with that. This doctrine will, in all probability, be gradually propagated till it has votaries enough to countenance an open avowal of it. For nothing can be more evident to those who are able to take an enlarged view of the subject than the alternative of an adoption of the new Constitution or a dismemberment of the Union. It will therefore be of use to begin by examining the advantages of that Union, the certain evils, and the probable dangers to which every state will be exposed from its dissolution. This shall accordingly constitute the subject of my next address. Okay, so basically, the opening Federalist paper is essentially Hamilton introducing himself as someone who is openly supporting the Constitution. He warns people that many arguments will be made on both sides, both in favor and against, that will be made, I don't need to, that's repetitive, be made both in favor and against a stronger union, and to warn against people assuming bad intentions by either side, but also to be careful as good things can hide bad intentions. I don't know, it's pretty general, pretty vague, pretty whatever. Okay. When the people of America reflect that they are now called upon to decide a question which, in its consequences, must prove one of the most important that ever engaged their attention, the propriety of their taking a very comprehensive as well as very serious view of it will be evident. Nothing is more certain than the indispensable necessity of government, and it is equally undeniable that whenever and however it is instituted, the people must cede to it some of their natural rights in order to vest it with requisite powers. It is well worthy of consideration, therefore, whether it would conduce more to the interest of the to the people of America that they should, to all general purposes, be one nation under one federal government, or that they should divide themselves into separate confederacies and give to the head of each the same kind of powers which they are advised to place in one national government. Basically, right, you have to, in order to have a government with powers, obviously you're ceding some kind of power to the government, obviously, right? It has until lately been a received and uncontradicted opinion that the prosperity of the people of America depended upon their continuing firmly united, and the wishes, prayers, and efforts of our best and wisest citizens have been constantly directed to that object. But politicians now appear who insist that this opinion is erroneous, and that instead of looking for safety and happiness in union, we ought to seek it in a division of the states into distinct confederacies or sovereignties. However extraordinary this new doctrine may appear, it nevertheless has its advocates, and certain characters who were much opposed to it formerly are at present of the number. Obviously, the idea of not forming a union is becoming more popular, and there are big people that are taking up that position. Whatever may be the arguments or inducements which have wrought this change in the sentiments and declarations of these gentlemen, it certainly would not be wise in the people at large to adopt these new political tenets without being fully convinced that they are founded in truth and sound policy. It has often given me pleasure to observe that independent America was not composed of detached and distant territories, but that one connected, fertile, wide-spreading country was the portion of our Western sons of liberty. Providence has, in a particular manner, blessed it with a variety of soils and productions, and watered it with innumerable streams for the delight and accommodation of its inhabitants. A succession of navigable waters forms a kind of chain round its borders, as if to bind it together, while the most noble rivers in the world, running at convenient distances, present them with highways for the easy communication of friendly aids and the mutual transportation and exchange of their various commodities. Basically, that even geographically, look at how united we are. With equal pleasure, I have, as often, taken notice that Providence has been pleased to give this one connected country to one united people, a people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion, attached to the same principles of government, very similar in their manners and customs, and who, by their joint counsels, arms, and efforts, fighting side by side throughout a long and bloody war, have nobly established general liberty and independence. This country and this people seem to have been made for each other, and it appears as if it was the design of Providence that an inheritance so proper and convenient for a band of brethren, united to each other by the strongest ties, should never be split into a number of unsocial, jealous, and alien sovereignties. Similar sentiments have hitherto prevailed among all orders and denominations of men among us. To all general purposes, we have uniformly been one people, each individual citizen everywhere enjoying the same national rights, privileges, and protection. As a nation, we have made peace and war. As a nation, we have vanquished our common enemies. As a nation, we have formed alliances and made treaties and entered into various compacts and conventions with foreign states. A strong sense of the value and blessings of union induced the people, at a very early period, to institute a federal government to preserve and perpetuate it. They formed it almost as soon as they had a political existence, nay, at a time when their habitations were in flames, when many of their citizens were bleeding, and when the progress of hostility and desolation left little room for those calm and mature inquiries and reflections which must ever precede the formation of a wise and well-balanced government for a free people. It is not to be wondered at that a government instituted in times so inauspicious should on experiment be found greatly deficient and inadequate to the purpose it was intended to answer. It's basically we're talking about how, look, we're all together in this, we're all the same people, we fought against the same enemy, we're doing all this, but we might have formed a government to fight a war. However, the war is going on. It's some wild shit. We don't know how to make the best government in times of war. Obviously, we're just trying to survive. This intelligent people perceived and regretted these defects. Still continuing, no less attached to union than enamored of liberty, they observed the danger which immediately threatened the former and more remotely the latter, and being persuaded that ample security for both could only be found in a national government more wisely framed, they, as with one voice, convened the late convention at Philadelphia to take important subject under consideration. This convention, composed of men who possessed the confidence of the people, and many of whom had become highly distinguished by their patriotism, virtue, and wisdom, in times which tried the minds and hearts of men, undertook the arduous task. In the mild season of peace, with minds unoccupied by other subjects, They passed many months in cool, uninterrupted, and daily consultation. And finally, without having been awed by power or influenced by any passions except love for their country, they presented and recommended to the people the plan produced by their joint and very unanimous councils. Admit for so is the fact that this plan is only recommended, not imposed. Yet let it be remembered that it is neither recommended to blind approbation nor to blind reprobation, but to that sedate and candid consideration which the magnitude and importance of the subject demand, and which it certainly ought to receive. So a bunch of smart people came together. These people are all patriotic. They are concerned about the well-being of their citizens, and they've put together this plan. They're not telling you have to accept it. They merely ask that you consider it. Don't accept it out of hand. Don't turn it away out of hand. Right? But consider it seriously. But this, as was remarked in the foregoing number of this paper, is more to be wished than expected, that it may be so considered and examined. Experience on a former occasion teaches us not to be too sanguine in such hopes. It is not yet forgotten that well-grounded apprehensions of imminent danger induced the people of America to form the memorable Congress of 1774. That body recommended certain measures to their constituents, and the event proved their wisdom, yet it is fresh in our memories how soon the press began to teem with pamphlets and weekly papers against those very measures. Not only many of the officers of government who obeyed the dictates of personal interest, but others from a mistaken estimate of consequences, or the undue influence of former attachments, or whose ambition aimed at objects which did not correspond with the public good, were indefatigable in their efforts to persuade the people to reject the advice of that patriotic. Many, indeed, were deceived and deluded, but the great majority of the people reasoned and decided judiciously, and happy they are in reflecting that they did so. I don't have a well-rounded history of things that sprung from the 1774 Congress, so I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't speak to it. Sounds like it was pretty cringe, though. They considered that the Congress was composed of many wise and experienced men. That, being convened from different parts of the country, they brought with them and communicated to each other a variety of useful information. That, in the course of the time they passed together in inquiring into and discussing the true interests of their country, they must have acquired very accurate knowledge on that head. That they were individually interested in the public liberty and prosperity, and therefore that it was not less their inclination than their duty to recommend only such measures as, after the most mature deliberation, they really thought prudent and advisable. So just talking about how these guys are wise. They came together, they, thought about things, and they made good recommendations. These and similar considerations then induced the people to rely greatly on the judgment and integrity of the Congress, and they took their advice, notwithstanding the various arts and endeavors used to deter them from it. But if the people at large had reason to confide in the men of that Congress, few of whom had been fully tried or generally known, still greater reason have they now to respect the judgment and advice of the Convention, for it is well known that some of the most distinguished members of that Congress, who have been since tried and justly approved for patriotism and abilities, and who have grown old in acquiring political information, were also members of this Convention, and carried into it their accumulated knowledge and experience. People that were part of the first Congress went to the Constitutional Convention. If you trusted them, you should trust them doing the convention, right? It's worthy of remark that not only the first, but every succeeding Congress, as well as the late Convention, have invariably joined with the people in thinking that the prosperity of America depended on its union. To preserve and perpetuate it was the great object of the people in forming that Convention. And it is also the great object of the plan which the Convention has advised them to adopt. Would that propriety, therefore, or for what good general purpose, are attempts at this particular period made by some men to depreciate the importance of the Union? Or why is it suggested that 3 or 4 confederacies would be better than one? I am persuaded in my own mind that the people have always thought right on this subject, and that their universal and uniform attachment to the cause of the Union rests on great and weighty reasons, which I shall endeavor to develop and explain in some ensuing papers. Those who promote the idea of substituting a number of distinct confederacies in the room of the plan of the Convention seem clearly to foresee that the rejection of it would put the continuance of the Union in the utmost jeopardy. That certainly would be the case, and I sincerely wish that it may be as clearly foreseen by every good citizen, that whenever the dissolution of the Union arrives, America will have reason to exclaim, in the words of the poet, "Farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness." So, we haven't gotten anything specific yet, but basically, Jay argues that the nation springs from a common background of people who have shared a common struggle and only survived up to this point because of how important a union of all these states was seen as. Argue that the states will only survive a strong federal government moving forward. Federalist number 3. More from John J. Oh, these have titles. Wait, do they all have titles? Oh, they do have titles. The same subject continued. Cringe Lord. It is not a new observation that the people of any country, if, like the Americans, intelligent and well-informed, seldom adopt and steadily preserve or persevere for many years in an erroneous opinion respecting their interests. That consideration naturally tends to create great respect for the high opinion which the people of America have so long and uniformly entertained of the importance of their continuing firmly united under one federal government, vested with sufficient powers for all general and national purposes. Okay, so if a country is persevering for a while, it must be because they've adopted some kind of good idea, I guess. Yeah. The more attentively I consider and investigate the reasons which appear to have given birth to this opinion, the more I become convinced that they are cogent and conclusive. Among the many objects to which a wise and free people find it necessary to direct their attention, that of providing for their safety seems to be the first. The safety of the people, doubtless, has relation to a great variety of circumstances and considerations, and consequently affords a great latitude to those who wish to define it precisely and comprehensively. At present, I mean only to consider it as it respects security for the preservation of peace and tranquility, as well as against dangers from foreign arms and influence, as from dangers of the like kind arising from domestic causes. As the former of these comes first in order, it is proper it should be first discussed. Let us therefore proceed to examine whether the people are not right in their opinion that a cordial union under an efficient national government affords them the best security that can be devised against hostilities from abroad. So the first and most important part of a federal government is to protect you from foreign enemies. Makes sense. The number of wars which have happened or will happen in the world will always be found to be in proportion to the number and weight of the causes, whether real or pretended, which provoke or invite them. If this remark be just, it becomes useful to inquire whether so many just causes of war are likely to be given by united America as by disunited America. For if it should turn out that united America will probably give the fewest, then it will follow that in this respect the Union tends most to preserve the people in a state of peace with other nations. The just causes of war, for the most part, arise either from violation of treaties or from direct violence. America has already formed treaties with no less than 6 foreign nations, and all of them, except Prussia, are maritime and therefore able to annoy and injure us. She has also extensive commerce with Portugal, Spain, and Britain, and, with respect to the two latter, has in addition the circumstance of neighborhood to attend to. It is of high importance to the peace of America that she observe the laws of nations towards all these powers, and to me it appears evident that this will be more perfectly and punctually done by one national government than it could be either by 13 separate states or by 3 or 4 distinct confederacies. Because when once an efficient national government is established, the best men in our country will not only consent to serve, but also will generally be appointed to manage it, for, although town or country or other contracted influence may place men in state assemblies or senates or courts of justice or executive departments, yet more general and extensive reputation for talents and other qualifications will be necessary to recommend men to offices under the national government, especially as it will have the widest field for choice and never experience that want of proper persons which is not uncommon in some of the states. So basically that if we want a state of wars, we'd have a better chance if we had just one territory managing treaties rather than like a bunch of different territories with a bunch of different treaties, and that hopefully a federal government will call upon it more qualified people than just individual state governments because it's a wider government, and so these people will be more qualified to make these treaties, etc., all this. Hence, it will result that the administration, the political councils, and the judicial decisions of the national government will be more wise, systematical, and judicious than those of individual states, and consequently more satisfactory with respect to other nations, as well as more safe with respect to us. Music. There you go. Because under the national government, treaties and articles of treaties, as well as the laws of nations, will always be expounded in one sense and executed in the same manner, whereas adjudications of the same point and questions in 13 states or in 3 or 4 confederacies will not always accord or be consistent, and that, as well from the variety of independent courts and judges appointed by different and independent governments, as from the different local laws and interests which may affect and influence them. The wisdom of the convention in committing such questions to the jurisdiction and judgments of courts appointed by and responsible only to one national government cannot be too much commended. Okay. Let's just sum this. Jay argues that having a national unified government produces better environments for its people. The first argument concerning peace. He argues that one national government has more capability and uniformity in accepting and enforcing treaties than multiple governments would, therefore maintaining greater periods of peace for the citizens. Because the prospect of present loss or advantage may often tempt the governing party in one or two states to swerve from good faith and justice, but those temptations not reaching the other states and consequently having little or no influence on the national government, the temptation will be fruitless, and good faith and justice be preserved. The case of the Treaty of Peace with Britain adds great weight to this reasoning, because even if the governing party and a state should be disposed to resist such temptations, yet as such temptations may and commonly do result from circumstances peculiar to the state and may affect a great number of the inhabitants, the governing party may not always be able, if willing, to prevent the injustice mediated or to punish the aggressors. But the national government, not being affected by those local circumstances, will neither be induced to commit the wrong themselves, nor want power or inclination to prevent or punish its commission by others. So basically that even if one state could benefit greatly by doing something that would be bad for all the other states, a national government would kind of curtail the interests of the individual states, basically, right? So far, therefore, as either designed or accidental violations of treaties, and the laws of nations afford just causes of war, they are less to be apprehended under one general government than under several lesser ones, and in that respect, the former most favors the safety of the people. States would also serve to balance each other's interests in a national government. As to those just causes of war which proceed from direct and unlawful violence, it appears equally clear to me that one good national government affords vastly more security against dangers of that sort than can be derived from any other quarter. Because such violences are more frequently caused by the passions and interests of a part than of the whole, of one or two states than of the Union, not a single Indian war has yet been occasioned by aggressions of the present federal government, feeble as it is, but there are several instances of Indian hostilities having been provoked by the improper conduct of individual states who, either unable or unwilling to restrain or punish offenses, have given occasion to the slaughter of many innocent inhabitants. The neighborhood of Spanish and British territories, bordering on some states and not on others, naturally confines the causes of quarrel more immediately to the borderers. The bordering states, if any, will be those who, under the impulse of sudden irritation and a quick sense of apparent interest or injury, will be most likely, by direct violence, to excite war with these nations, and nothing can so effectually obviate that danger as a national government whose wisdom and prudence will not be diminished by the passions which actuate the parties immediately interested. Basically, that like some states may be driven to violent conduct or be driven to immediate action because of a state's unique interest or specific interest, but a federal government would basically help to curtail or stop, a single state from driving everybody into war, basically. But not only fewer just causes of war will be given to the national government, but it will also be more in their power to accommodate and settle them amicably. Amicably. They will be more tempered and cool, and in that respect, as well as in others, will be more in capacity to act advisedly than the offending state. The pride of states, as well as of men, naturally disposes them to justify all their actions and opposes their acknowledging, correcting, or repairing their errors and offenses. The national government in such cases will not be affected by this pride, but will proceed with moderation and candor to consider and decide on the means most proper to extricate them from the difficulties which threaten them. Besides, it is well known that acknowledgments, explanations, and compensations are often accepted as satisfactory from a strong united nation, which would be rejected as unsatisfactory if offered by a state or confederacy of little consideration or power. In the year 1685, the state of Genoa, having offended Louis XIV, endeavored to appease him. He demanded that they should send their doge, or chief magistrate, accompanied by 4 of their senators, to France to ask his pardon and receive his terms. They were obliged to submit to it for the sake of peace. Would he, on any other occasion, either have demanded or have received the like humiliation from Spain or Britain or any other powerful nation? Wow. A unified government can cool and temper the individual interests of the state and also represent a stronger bargaining peace against foreign friend and foe alike. Okay, I'm only going to do 5 of these a day, okay? I think. Okay. Federalist 4, author, John J. Will you share these notes? Literally everything is published on my website. I think it's destiny.gg/notes. The same subject continued. Man, he's obsessed with this. Wow, Crane Shield, thanks for the 5 gifted subs. My last paper assigned several reasons why the safety of the people would be best secured by union against the danger it may be exposed to by just causes of war given to other nations, and those reasons show that such causes would not only be more rarely given, but also would be more easily accommodated by a national government than either by the state governments or the proposed little confederacies. But the safety of the people of America against dangers from foreign force depends not only on their forbearing to give just causes of war to other nations, but also on their placing and continuing themselves in such a situation as not to invite hostility or insult, for it need not be observed that there are pretended as well as just causes of war. It is too true, however disgraceful it may be to human nature, that nations in general will make war whenever they have a prospect of getting anything by it. Nay, absolute monarchs will often make war when their nations are to get nothing by it for the purposes and objects merely personal, such as thirst for military glory, revenge for personal affronts, ambition, or private compacts to aggrandize or support their particular families or partisans. These and a variety of other motives, which affect only the mind of the sovereign, often lead him to engage in wars not sanctioned by justice or the voice and interest of his people. Hold on. This paper is arguing and protecting the nation from just causes of war. This essay argues against protecting the nation from unjust pretend causes of war. These and a variety of other motives, which affect only the mind of the sovereign, often lead him to engage in wars not sanctified by justice or the voice and interests of his people. But independent of these inducements of war, which are more prevalent in absolute monarchies, but which well deserve our attention, there are others which affect nations as often as kings, and some of them will, on examination, be found to grow out of our relative situation and circumstances. Wouldn't you use state when referring to these? Nation to be referring to a group of people in these contexts? They're calling it a national government. What are you talking? I'm just complaining to him. Okay. Fuck. Where was I? Okay. With France and with Britain, we are rivals in the fisheries and can supply their markets cheaper than they can themselves, notwithstanding any efforts to prevent it by bounties on their own or duties on foreign fish. With them and with most other European nations, we are rivals in navigation and the carrying trade, and we shall deceive ourselves if we suppose that any of them will rejoice to see it flourish. For with them and with most other European nations, we are rivals in navigation and the carrying trade. We shall deceive ourselves if we suppose that any of them will rejoice to see it flourish. For, as our carrying trade cannot increase without in some degree diminishing theirs, it is more their interest and will be their policy to restrain than to promote it. In the trade to China and India, we interfere with more than one nation, inasmuch as it enables us to partake in advantages which they had in a manner monopolized, and as we thereby supply ourselves with commodities which we used to purchase from them. Basically talking about how, as we become bigger players in global trade, other people are going to get mad at us, obviously, and they're going to want to blow our ships up, basically, right? The extension of our own commerce in our own vessels cannot give pleasure to any nations who possess territories on or near this continent, because the cheapness and excellence of our productions, added to the circumstance of vicinity and the enterprise and address of our merchants and navigators, will give us a greater share in the advantages which those territories afford than consist with the wishes or policy of their respected sovereigns. Spain thinks it convenient to shut the Mississippi against us on the one side, and Britain excludes us from the St. Lawrence on the other. Nor will either of them permit the other waters which are between them and us to become the means of mutual intercourse and traffic. From these and such like considerations, which might, if consistent with prudence, be more amplified and detailed, it is easy to see that jealousies and uneasiness may gradually slide into the minds and cabinets of other nations, and that we are not to expect that they should regard our advancement in union, in power, and consequence by land and by sea, with an eye of indifference and composure. The people of America are aware that inducements to war may arise out of these circumstances, as well as from others not so obvious at present, and that whenever such inducements may find fit time and opportunity for operation, pretenses to color and justify them will not be wanting. Basically, listen, if people want to go to war with us because they want trade or some bullshit, they'll always find a reason to do it, just or otherwise. Wisely, therefore, do they consider union and a good national government as necessary to put and keep them in such a situation as, instead of inviting war, will tend to repress and discourage it. The situation consists in the best possible state of defense and necessarily depends on the government, the arms, and the resources of the country. As the safety of the whole is the interest of the whole and cannot be provided for without government, either one or more or many, let us inquire whether one government is not, relative to the object in question, more competent than any other given number whatever. Other countries would probably grow unhappy with the growth of America's shipping and fishing industry as a given example, and a unified federal government would discourage parties from engaging in warfare against the U.S. springing from these jealousies. One government can collect and avail itself of the talents and experience of the ablest men. Yeah, so even they like ableism. In whatever part of the Union they may be found. It can move on uniform principles of policy. It can harmonize, assimilate, and protect the several parts and members, and extend the benefits of its foresight and precautions to each. In the formation of treaties, it will regard the interest of the whole, and the particular interests of the parts as connected with that of the whole. In the formation of treaties, it will regard the interests of the whole, and the particular interests of the parts as connected with that of the whole. It can apply the resources and power of the whole to the defense of any particular part, and that more easily and expeditiously than state governments or separate confederacies can possibly do, for want of concert and unity of system. Basically, a federal government can respond with any particular instance better than like a whole bunch of confederacies or states can, right? It can place the militia under one plan of discipline, and by putting their officers in a proper line of subordination to the chief magistrate, will, as it were, consolidate them into one corps, and thereby render them more efficient than if divided into 13 or into 3 or 4 distinct independent companies. What would the militia of Britain be if the English militia obeyed the government of England, if the Scotch militia obeyed the government of Scotland, and if the Welsh militia obeyed the government of Wales? Suppose an invasion, would those 3 governments, if they agreed at all, be able, with all their respective forces, to operate against the enemy so effectually as the single government of Great Britain would? We have heard much of the fleets of Britain, and the time may come, if we are wise, when the fleets of America may engage attention. But if one national government had not so regulated the navigation of Britain as to make it a nursery for seamen, if one national government had not called forth all the national means and materials for forming fleets, their prowess and their thunder would never have been celebrated. Let England have its navigation and fleet. Let Scotland have its navigation and fleet. Let Wales have its navigation and fleet. Let Ireland have its navigation and fleet. Let those 4 of the constituent parts of the British Empire be under 4 independent governments, and it is easy to perceive how soon they would each dwindle into comparative insignificance. Apply these facts to our own case. Leave America divided into 13, or, if you please, into 3 or 4 independent governments. What armies could they raise and pay? What fleets could they ever hope to have? If one was attacked, would the others fly to its succor, right? Wait.
Hey, if you're a sucker for well-designed aesthetic productivity things like me.
Good one. Good one. Wait, how do you go to the next?
This is really, really good. I'll put a link in the video description.
That he might know how to succor us according to our infirmities. Let me share 2 areas.
Have the power
Oh, is it succor?
to heal, comfort, restore, succor, strengthen, console.
And he will be given succor by a magical cow.
Yeah. True. Would the others fly to its succor and spend their blood and money in its defense? Would there be no danger of their being flattered into neutrality by its specious promises, or seduced by a too great fondness for peace to decline hazarding their tranquility and present safety for the sake of neighbors, of whom perhaps they have been jealous, and whose importance they are content to see diminished? Although such conduct would not be wise, it would nevertheless be natural. The history of the states of Greece and of other countries abounds with such instances, and it is not improbable that what has so often happened would, under similar circumstances, happen again. Jay argues that a divided government among several confederacies would be ineffective at responding to foreign threats, as divided states would be too tempted to maintain their neutrality and too unwilling to shed blood in defense of another party. I think he's referencing the Peloponnesian War. Yeah, he might be. I'm sure there's a lot of wars that things like this happened, right? But admit that they might be willing to help the invaded state or confederacy. How and when and in what proportion shall aids of men and money be afforded? Who shall command the allied armies, and from which of them shall he receive his orders? Who shall settle the terms of peace, and in case of disputes, what umpire shall decide between them and compel acquiescence? Various difficulties and inconveniences would be inseparable from such a situation, whereas one government, watching over the general and common interests and combining and directing the powers and resources of the whole, would be free from all these embarrassments and conduce far more to the safety of the people. But whatever may be our situation, whether firmly united under one national government or split into a number of confederacies, certain it is that foreign nations will know and view it exactly as it is, and they will act toward us accordingly. If they see that our national government is efficient and well administered, our trade prudently regulated, our militia properly organized and disciplined, our resources and finances discreetly managed, our credit our credit reestablished, our people free, contented, and united, they will be much more disposed to cultivate our friendship than provoke our resentment. If, on the other hand, they find us either all of this, by the way, as you're going up or down through like levels of government, all of this applies to international treaties as well, right? Or international agreements as well, and then down to local governments as well, right? That if you have like a united government, if you've got a united NATO, EU, whatever, and people look at that, they're way less likely to fuck with you because they know that inviting conflict with one invites conflict with the whole. But if they see you as kind of divided amongst yourselves, as not unified amongst yourselves, then they think that they can pick apart or fight with just like particular members of your organization or whatever, and not induce, I guess, the wrath of the entirety of the body, right? If, on the other hand, they find us either destitute of an effectual government, each state doing right or wrong as to its rulers may seem convenient, or split into 3 or 4 independent and probably discordant republics or confederacies, one inclining to Britain, another to France, and a third to Spain, and perhaps played off each other by the 3, what a poor, pitiful figure will America make in their eyes? How liable would she become not only to their contempt, but to their outrage, and how soon would dear-bought experience proclaim that when a people or family so divide, it never fails to be against themselves. True. Is that a befriend versus befoe someone? Is that not a word? Did I just make that up? Let's see. Conquer? Is that right? I don't think I'm spelling it right. Okay. Publius, loser. Federalist Paper No. 5. The same subject continued. These might be all the ones from John Jay. Queen Anne, in her letter of the 1st of July, 1706, to the Scotch Parliament, makes some observations on the importance of the union then formed between England and Scotland, which merit our attention. I shall present the public with 1 or 2 extracts from it. Quote, "An entire and perfect union will be the solid foundation of lasting peace. It will secure your religion, liberty, and property, remove the animosities amongst yourselves, and the jealousies and differences betwixt our 2 kingdoms. It must increase your strength, riches, and trade, and by this union the whole island, being joined in affection and free from all apprehensions of different interest, will be enabled to resist all its enemies." End quote. And the next quote. "We must earnestly recommend to you calmness and unanimity in this great and weighty affair, that the union may be brought to a happy conclusion, being the only effectual way to secure our present and future happiness, and disappoint the designs of our and your enemies, who will doubtless, on this occasion, use their utmost endeavors to prevent or delay this union." It was remarked in the preceding paper that weakness and divisions at home would invite dangers from abroad, and that nothing would tend more to secure us from them than union, strength, and good government within ourselves. This subject is copious and cannot easily be exhausted. The history of Great Britain is the one with which we are in general the best acquainted, and it gives us many useful lessons. We may profit by their experience without paying the price which it cost them. Although it seems obvious to common sense that the people of such an island should be but one nation, yet we find that they were for ages divided into 3, and that those 3 were almost constantly embroiled in quarrels and wars with one another. Notwithstanding, their true interest with respect to the continental nations was really the same, yet by the arts and policy and practices of those nations, their mutual jealousies were perpetually kept inflamed, and for a long series of years, they were far more inconvenient and troublesome than they were useful and assisting to each other. Basically just, obviously, the idea that, man, look at these countries, they're all literally on the same fucking island. Why can't they just be one country? Seems like it would make a lot more sense. They'd be stronger for it, right? Yeah. Should the people of America divide themselves into 3 or 4 nations, would not the same thing happen? Would not similar jealousies arise and be in like manner cherished? Instead of their being joined in affection and free from all apprehension of different interests, envy and jealousy would soon extinguish confidence and affection, and the partial interests of each confederacy, instead of the general interests of all America, would be the only objects of their policy and pursuits. Hence, like most other bordering nations, they would always be either involved in disputes and war, or live in the constant apprehension of them. The most sanguine advocates for 3 or 4 confederacies cannot reasonably suppose that they would long remain exactly on an equal footing in point of strength, even if it were possible to form them so at first. But admitting that to be practicable, yet what human contrivance can secure the continuance of such equality? Basically saying like, yeah, sure, maybe 3 or 4 different governments could start off and like they'd be cool at first, but obviously as time goes on, we're going to fight with each other over something. It always happens, right? Independent of those local circumstances, which tend to beget an increased power in one part and to impede its progress in another, we must advert to the effects of that superior policy and good management, which would probably distinguish the government of one above the rest, and by which their relative equality in strength and consideration would be destroyed. For it cannot be presumed that the same degree of sound policy, prudence, and foresight will uniformly be observed by each of these confederacies for a long succession of years. Some countries might come ahead, some might fall behind, like it would just not work well. Whenever, and from whatever causes it might happen, and happen it would, that any one of these nations or confederacies should rise on the scale of political importance much above the degree of her neighbors, that moment would those neighbors behold her with envy and with fear. Both those passions would lead them to countenance, if not to promote, whatever might promise to diminish her importance, and would also restrain them from measures calculated to advance or even secure her prosperity. Basically, we would be competing with each other instead of trying to make each other stronger, right? Much time would not only be necessary to enable her to discern these unfriendly dispositions. She would soon begin not only to lose confidence in her neighbors, but also to feel a disposition equally unfavorable to them. Distrust naturally creates distrust, and by nothing is goodwill and kind conduct more speedily changed than by invidious jealousies and uncandid imputations, whether expressed or implied. The North is generally the region of strength, and many local circumstances render it probable that the most northern of the proposed confederacies would, at a period not very distant, be unquestionably more formidable than any of the others. No sooner would this become evident than the northern hive would excite the same ideas and sensations in the most southern parts of America, which it formerly did in the southern parts of Europe. Nor does it appear to be a rash conjecture that its young swarms might often be tempted to gather honey in the more blooming fields and milder air of their luxurious and more delicate neighbors. They who well consider the history of similar divisions and confederacies will find abundant reason to apprehend that those in contemplation would in no other sense be neighbors than as they would be borderers, that they would neither love nor trust one another, but on the contrary would be a prey to discord, jealousy, and mutual injuries. In short, that they would place us exactly in the situation in which some nations doubtlessly wish to see us, viz. Formidable only to each other. For these considerations, it appears that these gentlemen are greatly mistaken who suppose that alliances offensive and defensive might be formed between these confederacies and would produce that combination and union of wills, of arms, and of resources which would be necessary to put and keep them in a formidable state of defense against foreign enemies. Jay argues in this essay that the growing strength in some hives would cause them to invade or steal resources from the others. Should America be 3 or 4 separate governments instead of one unified government? When did the independent states, into which Britain and Spain were formerly divided, combine in such alliance or unite their forces against a foreign enemy? The proposed confederacies will be distinct nations. Each of them would have its commerce with foreigners to regulate by distinct treaties, and as their productions and commodities are different and proper for different markets, so would those treaties be essentially different. Different commercial concerns must create different interests, and of course, different degrees of political attachment to and connection with different foreign nations. Hence, it might and probably would happen that the foreign nation with whom the Southern Confederacy might be at war would be the one with whom the Northern Confederacy would be the most desirous of preserving peace and friendship. An alliance so contrary to their immediate interest would not therefore be easy to form, nor, if formed, would it be observed and fulfilled with perfect good faith. Nay, it is far more probable that in America, as in Europe, neighboring nations acting under the impulse of opposite interests and unfriendly passions would frequently be found taking different sides. Considering our distance from Europe, it would be more natural for these confederacies to apprehend danger from one another than from distant nations, and therefore that each of them should be more desirous to guard against the others by the aid of foreign alliances than to guard against foreign dangers by alliances between themselves. And here let us not forget how much more easy it is to receive foreign fleets into our ports and foreign armies into our country than it is to persuade or compel them to depart. How many conquests did the Romans and others make in the characters of allies, and what innovations did they, under the same character, introduce into the governments of those whom they pretended to protect? Oh, the Soviets did this as well, right? Let candid men judge, then, whether the division of America into any given number of independent sovereignties would tend to secure us against the hostilities and improper interference of foreign nations. Competition between local confederacies would invite unions, would invite competing unions, agreements, competing alliances with foreign nations who would then be able to exert more influence over the American confederacies. There you go. Okay. We'll do 5 more of these tomorrow. We'll try to do 5 a day. What? Okay. Federalist number 6, concerning dangers from dissensions between the states. Finally, John Jay has now gotten sick. We don't care about him anymore. We're just getting based writings from author Alexander Hamilton. The 3 last numbers of this paper have been dedicated to an enumeration of the dangers to which we should be exposed in a state of disunion from the arms and arts of foreign nations. I shall now proceed to delineate dangers of a different and perhaps still more alarming kind, those which will, in all probability, flow from dissensions between the states themselves and from domestic factions and convulsions. These have been already, in some instances, slightly anticipated, but they deserve a more particular and more full investigation. A man must be far gone in utopian speculations who can seriously doubt that, if these states should either be wholly disunited or only united in partial confederacies, the subdivisions into which they might be thrown would have frequent and violent contests with each other. To presume a want of motives for such contests as an argument against their existence would be to forget that men are ambitious, vindictive, and rapacious. To look for a continuation of harmony between a number of independent, unconnected sovereignties in the same neighborhood would be to disregard the uniform course of human events and to set at defiance the accumulated experience of ages. So basically saying, obviously, if you get a bunch of territories that live right next to each other, these people are going to go to war with each other, they're going to fight for resources, there's going to be differences between them, like it always happens. It's always happened in history, it will continue to happen in history, right? The causes of hostility among nations are innumerable. There are some which have a general and almost constant operation upon the collective bodies of society. Of this description are the love of power, or the desire of preeminence and dominion, the jealousy of power, or the desire of equality and safety. There are others which have a more circumscribed, though an equally operative influence within their spheres. Such are the rivalships and competitions of commerce between commercial nations. And there are others, not less numerous than either of the former, which take their origin entirely in private passions, in the attachments, enmities, interests, hopes, and fears of leading individuals in the communities of which they are members. Men of this class, whether the favorites of a king or of a people, have in too many instances abused the confidence they possessed, and assuming the pretext of some public motive, have not scrupled to sacrifice the national tranquility to personal advantage or personal gratification. Basically, tons of people will go to war for tons of reasons. This is just always a thing in human history, right? The celebrated Pericles, in compliance with the resentment of a prostitute, at the expense of much of the blood and treasure of his countrymen, attacked, vanquished, and destroyed the city of the Samnians. The same man, stimulated by private pique against the Megarensians, I don't know how to pronounce this shit, another nation of Greece, or to avoid a prosecution with which he was threatened as an accomplice of a supposed theft of the statuary Phidias, or to get rid of the accusations prepared to be brought against him for dissipating the funds of the state in the purchase of popularity, or from a combination of all these causes, was the primitive author of that famous and fatal war, distinguished in the Grecian annals by the name of the Peloponnesian War, which, after various vicissitudes, intermissions, and renewals, terminated in the ruin of the Athenian Commonwealth. Christ.
Vicissitude.
A change of circumstances or fortune. Let's see. Hamilton begins by laying out all the different ways that neighboring nations have come to compete and fight with each other in the past. The ambitious cardinal, who was prime minister to Henry VIII, permitting his vanity to aspire to the Triple Crown, entertained hopes of succeeding in the acquisition of that splendid prize by the influence of the Emperor Charles V. To secure the favor and interest of this enterprising and powerful monarch, he precipitated England into a war with France, contrary to the plainest dictates of policy, and at the hazard of the safety and independence, as well of the kingdom over which he presided by his councils, as of Europe in general. For if there ever was a sovereign who bid fair to realize the project of universal monarchy, it was the Emperor Charles V, of whose intrigues Wolsey was at once the instrument and the dupe. Obviously, going over history of conflicts and all this, I guess people at the time would have been more familiar with this. Maybe you guys are familiar with this. I'm not, because history is cringe. I'm just kidding. I just haven't studied this. The influence which the bigotry of one female, the petulance of another, and the cabals of a third had in the contemporary policy, ferments, and pacifications of a considerable part of Europe are topics that have been too often descanted upon not to be generally known. To multiply examples of the agency of personal considerations and the production of great national events, either foreign or domestic, according to their direction, would be an unnecessary waste of time. Those who have but a superficial acquaintance with the sources from which they are to be drawn will themselves recollect a variety of instances, and those who have a tolerable knowledge of human nature will not stand in need of such lights to form their opinion either of the reality or extent of that agency. It's basically self-evident that, like, human history is full of conflict with one another for good reasons and bad reasons, basically. Perhaps, however, a reference tending to illustrate the general principle may with propriety be made to a case which has lately happened among ourselves. If Shays had not been a desperate debtor, it is much to be doubted whether Massachusetts would have been plunged into a civil war. This is a reference to Shays' rebellion, I believe, right? A violent uprising in Massachusetts from 86 to 87. Okay, so we are aware of this because it was part of our insurrection research, right? Oh, so this is a real life example. So he's basically saying, like, people go to war and do conflict for all sorts of crazy personal and public reasons and all, like, dumb things, right? And, like, here's an example. Shays' rebellion, I imagine, would be fresh in people's minds. This guy, part of the rebellion, was probably instigated by the fact that he was, like, severely in debt. Right? So he's giving a real life example. This has already happened in the newly formed colonies and the newly formed Confederation of States. Yeah. But notwithstanding the concurring testimony or experience, in this particular, there are still to be found visionary or designing men who stand ready to advocate the paradox of perpetual peace between the states, though dismembered and alienated from each other. He's referring to people that will still try to make the argument that, wow, having 4 different confederacies is going to be better. Yeah. Hassan just said that you're lying about being invited to the DNC. Why would he? What do you mean? We literally had, my chat was literally upset about me not going. What do you mean? I don't want to, like, you said you never got an invite and are lying? I mean, I can link the form. I don't want to leak Kyla's logs. Kyla linked me a thing. She said, fill this out for the DNC tonight or send me your this and I'll do it, assuming you're coming, yeah. And I said, I'll check this after stream. Give me 15 minutes. She said, okay, I'm confirming your game for this. If not, I would want to get your pass to someone else. I have to do this by tonight. And I said, okay, just checking what are the dates for this and what are the plans for this. Is there a write-up of anything that's, like, officially happening? She said it's the 19th to the 23rd, no official write-up. We'll be in the media hall with other major media teams, live streaming on site with the ability to go mobile on the main areas. You can talk to each other, political surrogates, and other media members that attend. Blah, blah, blah. And then my response, she got really mad. My response was, okay. I think I'm going to sit this one out and just cover from home. I'm trying to crush streaming hours / YouTube stuff this month because my last few have been slacking. And I feel like I'll be able to better connect with your broadcasts and stuff from home. And then she sent me this GIF in response. And then I sent her a smiley face. I don't know what else you want me to say. I don't know. Okay. I mean, if he wants to think I wasn't invited, that makes him, like, feel better about himself, then he knock yourself out, I guess. Like, why would I even lie about this? Like, I have no problem if the DNC didn't want to work with me. I could understand. I'm a super spicy content creator. But I wouldn't even be mad. I would, like, get it, right? Thoughts on turning this into prepared content for wider dissemination? It could also serve as a mission statement for the media company. Maybe. He's trying really hard to pedo jacket me. Why? He fucked Paris Hilton when she was, like, 19, I think, and he was, like, his mid or late 20s, wasn't he? Why would he try to pedo jacket me? I'm pretty sure he's fucked more young people than I have. I don't know why he... I mean, like, what does he want to... I don't know. Fuck, but, like, he can figure his shit out. I don't really care. And if that didn't happen... Wait, did I say Paris Hilton? No, I said Paris Jackson, not Paris Hilton. I said Paris Hilton. I'm pretty sure I said Paris Jackson. Okay. Anyway, back here. Maybe fuck Paris Hilton, too. Who knows? But now, okay, we're continuing on this. The genius of republics, say they, is pacific. The spirit of commerce has a tendency to soften the manners of men and to extinguish those inflammable humors which have so often kindled into wars. Commercial republics like ours will never be disposed to waste themselves in ruinous contentions with each other. They will be governed by mutual interest and will cultivate a spirit of mutual amity and concord. Okay, so he's saying this is what the anti-federalists are arguing. They think that, well, just because we trade, that means just because that we trade with each other, we'll never go to war with each other. He's attacking these people, basically. Is it not, we may ask these projectors in politics, the true interest of all nations to cultivate the same benevolent and philosophic spirit? If this be their true interest, have they in fact pursued it? Has it not, on the contrary, invariably been found that momentary passions and immediate interest have a more active and imperious control over human conduct than general or remote considerations of policy, utility, or justice? Have republics in practice been less addicted to war than monarchies? Are not the former administered by men as well as the latter? Are there not aversions, predilections, rivalships, and desires of unjust acquisitions that affect nations as well as kings? Are not popular assemblies frequently subject to the impulses of rage, resentment, jealousy, avarice, and of other irregular and violent propensities? Is it not well known that their determinations are often governed by a few individuals in whom they place confidence and are, of course, liable to be tinctured by the passions and views of those individuals? Has commerce hitherto done anything more than change the objects of war? Is not the love of wealth as domineering and enterprising a passion as that of power or glory? Have there not been as many wars founded upon commercial motives since that has become the prevailing system of nations, as were before occasioned by the cupidity of territory or dominion? Has not the spirit of commerce in many instances administered new incentives to the appetite, both for the one and for the other? Let experience, the least fallible guide of human opinions, be appealed to for an answer to these inquiries. So saying that obviously, listen, like nations have been trading with each other for a long time, republics have existed, they still go to war with each other. He argues against the idea that commerce alone would dissuade nations from warring with each other as they continue to do so up to that day. What is Hassan's problem? Why is he so obsessed with Tiny? Probably because he's starting to take some of his first optics L's against me ever. I think probably the rape clip and the Jew shit, all of it is probably pretty bad. He's probably like pretty upset that he's lost. Like, I think he lost that Bernie Sanders opportunity as a result of all of that. He's probably for the first time started to get hate from external communities. He probably doesn't deal with that very much, except for maybe when people are attacking him in conservative communities, but they're not. I don't know how often they even cross. And then the fighting with Ethan's community and Ethan himself is probably weighing on him. And then Asmongold and XQC jumping into also Pylon. It's probably one of the first times that he's like dealt with a lot of hate from multiple communities. At the end of the day, he's a relatively fragile person. It sounds like I'm just talking shit, but like he does have a lot of, I say that, but like he's probably normal or more normal. He still has an abnormal tolerance for online hate. You have to work in this industry, but it's probably more than he's used to dealing with, and he's probably not exceptionally good at it. This is part of the reason why it's nice to come up with a big community, is because you're also protected by that big community. So he's probably lashing out a bit or trying to like regain control of the narrative, or like get people to focus their attacks on me or whatever to make himself feel better. But the problem is psychologically, I'm infinitely more powerful than he is. Okay, I will. Never mind. I was gonna make more pedophile jokes. Like he's trying to like pedo jacket me and shit. Like I fought this shit for like 15 years. Like it's not gonna happen. Okay. I don't give a fuck. I don't care if I am. Well, what are you going to do to me, bro? You're wild. You're never going to have a clip of me unironically arguing that it's good that some women are getting raped versus others. Like, it's not even close to the same thing. Or you copy paste, like, oh, look at this joke that he said in his chat, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to come anywhere close to like the unhinged shit that you said unironically on stream. But I mean, like, you keep playing those Nick Fuentes clips and see how far that gets you, I guess. Okay, sorry. Sparta, Athens, Rome, and Carthage were all republics. Two of them, Athens and Carthage, of the commercial kind, yet they as often engaged in wars, offensive and defensive, as the neighboring monarchies of the same times. Sparta was little better than a well-regulated camp, and Rome was never sated of carnage and conquest. Carthage, though a commercial republic, was the aggressor in the very war that ended in her destruction. Hannibal had carried her arms into the heart of Italy, into the gates of Rome, before Scipio, in turn gave him and overthrown the territories of Carthage and made a conquest of the Commonwealth. I should save like notable quotes. It's Scipio. Venice, in later times, figured more than once in wars of ambition, till, becoming an object to the other Italian states, Pope Julius II found means to accomplish that formidable league, which gave a deadly blow to the power and pride of this haughty republic. The provinces of Holland, till they were overwhelmed in debts and taxes, took a leading and conspicuous part in the wars of Europe. They had furious contests with England for the dominion of the sea and were among the most persevering and most implacable, right, of the opponents of Louis XIV. In the government of Britain, the representatives of the people compose one branch of the national legislature. Commerce has been for ages the predominant pursuit of that country. Few nations, nevertheless, have been more frequently engaged in war, and the wars in which the kingdom has been engaged have, in numerous instances, proceeded from the people. There have been, if I may so express it, almost as many popular as royal wars. The cries of the nation and the importunities of their representatives have, upon various occasions, dragged their monarchs into war or continued them in it contrary to their inclinations and sometimes contrary to the real interests of the state. In that memorable struggle for superiority between the rival houses of Austria and Bourbon, which so long kept Europe in a flame, it is well known that the antipathies of the English against the French, seconding the ambition, or rather the avarice, of a favorite leader, protracted the war beyond the limits marked out by sound policy, and for a considerable time in opposition to the views of the court. All of these things, obviously all of these are just examples of like, hey, if we have like different confederacies, we're going to war with each other. Like it's going to happen. It's just like, we're always going to fight. People fight. Whether we're republics, monarchies, whether we're trade-based or whatever, like people fight. We always fight. The wars of these two last mentioned nations have in a great measure grown out of commercial considerations, the desire of supplanting and the fear of being supplanted, either in particular branches of traffic or in the general advantages of trade and navigation. One of the things that's interesting here, I wish I had this quote earlier, is I argued a long time ago with a libertarian guy in 2018 maybe. He might have been he wasn't the leader of the Libertarian Party, but I think he was a big guy in the Libertarian Party. And his argument was for World War II, we should have never interfered. We should have just traded with everybody because a trade empire never goes to war. These would have been good arguments if I had read the Federalist Papers. I would have had good arguments against this. Or I could have given like, well, here's the historical arguments that were made historically about trade empires never engaging in war and that it absolutely happens. Yeah. Was it Larry Sharpe? Yes, it was. It was him. From this summary of what has taken place in other countries, whose situations have borne the nearest resemblance to our own, what reason can we have to confide in those reveries which would seduce us into an expectation of peace and cordiality between the members of the present Confederacy in a state of separation? Have we not already seen enough of the fallacy and extravagance of those idle theories which have amused us with promises of an exemption from the imperfections, weaknesses, and evils incident to society in every shape? Is it not time to awake from the deceitful dream of a golden age and to adopt as a practical maxim for the direction of our political conduct that we, as well as the other inhabitants of the globe, are yet remote from the happy empire of perfect wisdom and perfect virtue? Basically saying like this is a pipe dream. This is never going to happen, that we're all peaceful with each other. Let the point of extreme depression to which our national dignity and credit have sunk, let the inconveniences felt everywhere from a lax and ill administration of government, let the revolt of a part of the state of North Carolina, the late menacing disturbances in Pennsylvania, and the actual insurrections and rebellions in Massachusetts, Shays Rebellion, declare. So far is the general sense of mankind from corresponding with the tenets of those who endeavored to lull asleep our apprehensions of discord and hostility between the states in the event of disunion, that it has from long observation of the progress of society become a sort of axiom in politics that vicinity or nearness of situation constitutes national natural enemies. If you're near each other, you will always fight, basically, right? An intelligent writer expresses himself on this subject using as many slurs as possible on Twitter. An intelligent writer expresses himself on this subject to this effect. Neighboring nations, says he, are naturally enemies of each other unless their common weakness forces them to league in a confederate republic, and their constitution prevents the differences that neighborhood occasions, extinguishing that secret jealousy which dispossesses all states to aggrandize themselves at the expense of their neighbors. This passage, at the same time, points out the evil and suggests the remedy. What does it say? Quote from Principles des Négociations. Looks like French. Cringe. Is a book by Gabriel Bonnet de Mobley that was first published in 1757. The book covers topics such as international trade, modern warfare, diplomacy, and the role of ambassadors. Cute. Doesn't this contradict the claim that globalism prevents wars? No, I don't think so. I think having deeper integrations with people always leads to less fighting. This is arguing for superstructures that keep people from fighting with one another. You could argue that a form of like a multilateral trade agreement or things like the United Nations or whatever. Keep in mind that like these big superstructures like the UN or the EU, none of these things existed at the time that this was being written, but all of these arguments would probably be used in support of those types of superstructures, basically. You skipped a paragraph. Wait, where? This one? No. You trolled me. Fuck you. You trolled me. People are saying Hassan's losing his mind right now. What's going on?
Sorry, John. In service of those war crimes.
Oh no, now he's watching Boner Box. This is all coming from the Empanada video?
On October the 7th, babies were baked in ovens, babies were ripped from their mothers' wombs. October 7th was bad enough, but Elon had to exaggerate it for atrocity purposes. Those tweets are still up. Why would you trust anything this man says to you tonight? Look, he's here.
Based. Federalist number 7. The same subject continued concerning dangers from dissensions between the states. Again, from our good friend, Alexander Hamilton. Wait. Federalist number 7. The same subject continued concerning dangers from dissensions between the states. It is sometimes asked, with an air of seeming triumph, what inducements... Okay, this word was the word of the week. I think if I control F induce, I bet I'm going to see it over 100 fucking times between these 10 Federalist Papers. They love this word. Okay, never mind. Okay, John Jay was just obsessed with this word. I'm so sorry. I assumed Hamilton was as well. My bad, whatever. John Jay writes it a lot. Hamilton doesn't. He only does one time. Fuck you. Okay. I didn't pre-read. I'm sorry. How does the Sun make money if he gets no ads? Does he have sponsors or something? Subs he still gets a lot of money for. I don't know what his Twitch contract is or if he even had one for the past year, but... Oh, and all of his Patreons for his podcasts. It is sometimes asked, with an air of seeming triumph, what inducements could the states have, if disunited, to make war upon each other? Bro, we get it. How many times are you going to argue this? Wait, did we just do this? No, it's the same shit. I guess it says the same subject continue. Okay, whatever. It would be a full answer to this question to say precisely the same inducements which have at different times deluged in blood all the nations in the world. But unfortunately for us, the question admits of a more particular answer. There are causes of differences within our immediate contemplation of the tendency of which, even under the restraints of a federal constitution, we have had sufficient experience to enable us to form a judgment of what might be expected if those restraints were removed. Territorial disputes have, at all times, been found one of the most fertile sources of hostility among nations. Perhaps the greatest proportion of wars that have desolated the earth have sprung from this origin. This cause would exist among us in full force. We have a vast tract of unsettled territory within the boundaries of the United States. There still are discordant and undecided claims between several of them, and the dissolution of the Union would lay a foundation for similar claims between them all. It is well known that they have heretofore had serious and animated discussion concerning the rights to the lands which were ungranted at the time of the Revolution, and which usually went under the name of Crown lands. Actually, here's a question. I have no idea what the answer is. Is the territory of the 13 colonies, did any of those state borders change after the colonies were founded, were like the Articles of Confederation versus like the States of America, like the federal government was formed? Did the borders of these colonies like ever change much, or yes? Oh, okay. Apparently they have. West Virginia carved out of Virginia. Vermont seceded from New York, and Virginia and North Carolina CT had disputed boundaries out west. What's the purpose of this question? Of what question? I was just curious. Am I not allowed to be curious? The states within the limits of whose colonial governments they were comprised have claimed them as their property. The others have contended that the rights of the crown in this article devolved upon the Union, especially as to all that parts... Wait, hold on. The states within the limits of those of whose colonial governments they were comprised have claimed them as their property. The others have contended that the rights of the crown in this article devolved upon the Union, especially as to all that part of the Western Territory which, either by actual possession or through the submission of the Indian proprietors, was subjected to the jurisdiction of the King of Great Britain till it was relinquished in the Treaty of Peace. Oh, that there are competing claims for, well, who actually is right when deciding who the land was assigned to, basically. Okay. This, it has been said, was at all events an acquisition to the Confederacy by compact with a foreign power. It has been the prudent policy of Congress to appease this controversy by prevailing upon the states to make concessions to the United States for the benefit of the whole. This has been so far accomplished as, under a continuation of the Union, to afford a decided prospect of an amicable termination of the dispute. A dismemberment of the Confederacy, however, would revive this dispute and would create others on the same subject. At present, a large part of the vacant Western territory is, by cession at least, if not by any anterior right, the common property of the Union. If that were at an end, the states which made the cession on a principle of federal compromise would be apt, when the motive of the grant has ceased, to reclaim the lands as a reversion. The other states would no doubt insist on a proportion by right of representation. Their argument would be that a grant, once made, could not be revoked, and that the justice of participating in territory acquired or secured by the joint efforts of the Confederacy remained undiminished. If, contrary to probability, it should be admitted by all the states that each had a right to a share of this common stock, there would still be a difficulty to be surmounted as to a proper rule of apportionment. Different principles would be set up by different states for this purpose, and as they would affect the opposite interests of the parties, they might not easily be susceptible to of a pacific adjustment. So basically saying, like, they've already kind of like apportioned out a lot of the territory based on the union that they had, and if the Articles of Confederation were to dissolve and everybody be individual states or for different unions, like, how the fuck are they going to go back and decide, well, who actually gets what based on the land that they all acquired, as part of a confederated states? Bolton argues in this essay that doling out land that was apportioned under the current union in the absence of another union would be impossible and would lead to conflict. You have no real positions and don't have the facts, you just make up convincing arguments, destiny. Okay, true. In the wide field of Western territory, therefore, we perceive an ample theater for hostile pretensions without any umpire or common judge to interpose between the contending parties. To reason from the past to the future, we shall have good ground to apprehend that the sword would sometimes be appealed to as the arbiter of their differences. If people disagree enough, they're going to fight over it. The circumstances of the dispute between Connecticut and Pennsylvania, respecting the land of Wyoming, admonish us not to be sanguine in expecting an easy accommodation of such differences. The Articles of Confederation obliged the parties to submit the matter to the decision of a federal court. The submission was made, and the court decided in favor of Pennsylvania. But Connecticut gave strong indications of dissatisfaction with that termination, nor did she appear to be entirely resigned to it till, by negotiation and management, something like an equivalent was found for the loss she supposed herself to have sustained. Nothing here said is intended to convey the slightest censure on the conduct of that state. She no doubt sincerely believed herself to have been injured by the decision, and states, like individuals, acquiesce with great reluctance in determinations to their disadvantage. Just talking about a disagreement two states have and how it was settled by the federal government. Those who had an opportunity of seeing the inside of the transactions which attended the progress of the controversy between this state and the District of Vermont can vouch the opposition we experienced, as well from states not interested as from those which were interested in the claim, and can attest the danger to which the peace of the Confederacy might have been exposed had this state attempted to assert its right by force. Obviously, if we would have fought, there would have been a big fight, because they would have fought. Two motives prepondered in that opposition. One, a jealousy entertained of our future power, and the other, the interest of certain individuals of influence in the neighboring states who had obtained grants of lands under the actual government of that district. Even the states which brought forward claims in contradiction to ours seemed more solicitous to dismember this state than to establish their own pretensions. These were New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. New Jersey and Rhode Island, upon all occasions, discovered a warm zeal for the independence of Vermont, and Maryland, till alarmed by the appearance of a connection between Canada and that state, entered deeply into the same views. These being small states saw an unfriendly eye the perspective of our growing greatness. In a review of these transactions, we may trace some of the causes. In a review of these transactions, we may trace some of the causes which would be likely to embroil the states with each other if it should be their propitious destiny to become disunited. So basically, I think he's just saying, like, here's all the motives that these states had that they could have fought with each other over these land grabs, but because they were part of a federal government, they didn't go to war with each other, which is good. The competitions of commerce would be another fruitful source of contention. The states less favorably circumstanced would be desirous of escaping from the disadvantages of local situation and of sharing in the advantages of their more fortunate neighbors. Each state or separate confederacy would pursue a system of commercial policy peculiar to itself. This would occasion distinctions, preferences, and exclusions which would beget discontent. The habits of intercourse on the basis of equal privileges, to which we have been accustomed since the earliest settlement of the country, would give a keener edge to those causes of discontent than they would naturally have independent of this circumstance. In all caps he spams, we should be ready to denominate injuries those things which were in reality the justifiable acts of independent sovereignties consulting a distinct interest. denominate injuries, those things which are in reality justifiable. We should be ready to denominate injuries, those things which were in reality justifiable acts of independence consulting a distinct interest. We should be ready to denominate, so we should be willing to say that there was a party, I guess, that was injured, even if that injury was the justifiable act of some other entity which had like an interest of its own, basically. So intercourse on the basis of equal privileges, which we've been accustomed to, actually those causes of discontent, actually of independent circumstances. That's right. The spirit of enterprise, which characterizes the commercial part of America, has left no occasion of displaying itself unimproved. It is not at all probable that this unbridled spirit would pay much respect to those regulations of trade by which particular states might endeavor to secure exclusive benefits to their own citizens. The infractions of these regulations on one side, the efforts to prevent and repel them on the other, would naturally lead to outrages, and these to reprisals and wars. Basically, that each state would be self-interested and they would make like deals with each other and other people and would violate deals or whatever that would be more favorable to them than to other states or confederacies, I guess, right? The opportunities which some states would have of rendering others tributary to them by commercial regulations would be impatiently submitted to by the tributary states. The relative situation of New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey would afford an example of this kind. New York, from the necessities of revenue, must lay duties on her importations. A great part of these duties must be paid by the inhabitants of the two other states in the capacity of consumers of what we import. Look, even they understood that tariffs were just a tax on the end consumer. New York would neither be willing nor able to forego this advantage. Her citizens would not consent that a duty paid by them should be remitted in favor of the citizens of her neighbors, nor would it be practical, if there were not this impediment in the way, to distinguish the customers in our own markets. Would Connecticut and New Jersey long submit to be taxed by New York for her exclusive benefit? Should we be long permitted to remain in the quiet and undisturbed enjoyment of a metropolis, from the possessions of which we derived an advantage so odious to our neighbors and, in their opinion, so oppressive? Should we be able to preserve it against the incumbent weight of Connecticut on the one side and the cooperating pressure of New Jersey on the other? These are questions that temerity alone will answer in the affirmative. Basically saying that like they enjoy a particular type of rent, basically that they have access to these ports and control these ports, and that the neighbors around them are probably going to go to war with them and fight over it if they're not going to be happy having things like imported that they're going to have to pay a tax on and everything, right? Hold on one second. It's our friend going over.
The loaner box is even worse than the extremist Zionists who openly advocate for genocide.
Okay. The public debt of the Union would be a further cause of collision between the separate states or confederacies. The apportionment in the first instance and the progressive extinguishment afterward would be alike productive of ill humor and animosity. How would it be possible to agree upon a rule of apportionment satisfactory to all? There is scarcely any that can be proposed which is entirely free from real objections. Talking about the debt that the Union has incurred, how would you divvy it up amongst the states if they decided to become disunionized? These, as usual, would be exaggerated by the adverse interest of the parties. There are even dissimilar views among the states as to the general principle of discharging the public debt. Some of them, either less impressed with the importance of national credit, or because their citizens have little, if any, immediate interest in the question, feel an indifference, if not a repugnance, to the payment of the domestic debt at any rate. These would be inclined to magnify the difficulties of a distribution. Others of them, a numerous body of whose citizens are creditors to the public, beyond proportion of the state in the total amount of the national debt, would be strenuous for some equitable and effective provision. The procrastinations of the former would excite the resentments of the latter. The settlement of a rule would, in the meantime, be postponed by real differences of opinion and affected delays. The citizens of the states interested would clamor, foreign powers would urge for the satisfaction of their just demands, and the peace of the states would be hazarded to the double contingency of external invasion and internal contention. Basically, some people have lent money to the Union, some people have borrowed from the Union, or the Union has borrowed money, and there'd be like a disagreement between how to even settle these debts afterwards. Let's see, all of this was 7. He also argues that the debt assumed by the Union would be impossible to fairly apportion. It would lead to a great deal of conflict. Suppose the difficulties of agreeing upon a rule surmounted and the apportionment made. Still, there is great room to suppose that the rule agreed upon would, upon experiment, be found to bear harder upon some states than upon others. Those which were sufferers by it would naturally seek for a mitigation of the burden. The others would as naturally be disinclined to a revision, which was likely to end in an increase of their own encumbrances. The refusal would be too plausible a pretext to the complaining states to withhold their contributions, not to be embraced with avidity, and the non-compliance of these states with their engagements would be a ground of bitter discussion and altercation. if even the rule adopted should in practice justify the equality of its principle, still delinquencies in payments on the parts of some of these states would result from a diversity of other causes, the real deficiency of resources, the mismanagement of their finances, accidental disorders in the management of the government, and, in addition to the rest, the reluctance with which men commonly part with money for purposes that have outlived the exigencies which produce them and interfere with the supply of immediate wants. Basically, there's a whole bunch of reasons why people wouldn't pay shit back, and it would fuck shit up. Delinquencies from whatever causes would be productive of complaints, recriminations, and quarrels. There is perhaps nothing more likely to disturb the tranquility of nations than their being bound to mutual contributions for any common object that does not yield an equal and coincident. For it is an observation, as true as it is trite, that there is nothing men differ so readily about as the payment of money. Laws in violation of private contracts, as they amount to aggressions on the rights of those states whose citizens are injured by them, may be considered as another probable source of hostility. We are not authorized to expect that a more liberal or more equitable spirit would preside over the legislations of the individual states hereafter. If unrestrained by any additional checks, then we have heretofore seen, in too many instances, disgracing their several codes. We have observed the disposition to retaliation excited in Connecticut in consequence of the enormities perpetuated by the legislature of Rhode Island, and we reasonably infer that in similar cases, under other circumstances, a war, not of parchment but of the sword, would chastise such atrocious breaches of moral obligation and social justice. Basically, that states wouldn't give fair trials, I guess, to other citizens of other states if they had like issues with them, and basically just like, we need to work together or all of our shit's gonna be fucked, I guess, right? The probability of incompatible alliances between the different states of confederacies and different foreign nations and the effects of this situation upon the peace of the whole have been sufficiently unfolded in some preceding papers. From the view they have exhibited of this part of the subject, this conclusion is to be drawn that America, if not connected at all, or only by the feeble tie of a simple league, offensive and defensive, would, by the operation of such jarring alliances, be gradually entangled in all the pernicious labyrinths of European politics and wars, and by the destructive contentions of the parts into which she was divided, would be likely to become a prey to the artifices and machinations of powers equally the enemies of them all. Divide et impera must be the motto of every nation that either hates or fears us. Basically, like, look at Europe. These guys trade, they do all this other shit, but guess what? They still fucking fight all the time. Why the fuck are we going to divide ourselves up like the European losers have? If we do that, we're going to fuck ourselves. Listen, every single external enemy that we have, all of them know that the only way to conquer us is to divide us. So divide et impera must be the motto of every nation that either hates or fears us. I don't know what this stands for, but I'm guessing like divide and conquer or something. Oh, divide and command. Okay. Merge in America. If the United States were to break apart into multiple confederacies. He outlined what will be your dismissal as a country. Divide and conquer, it's a precept. I don't know what you mean by that. Dismissal as a country? I think you just outlined what would cause the country to, or what would cause everything to fuck up, basically. Okay. Do I have time to read this in 12 minutes? Federalist number 8. Sure. Okay. The consequences of hostilities between the states. Assuming it therefore as an established truth that the several states, in case of disunion or such combinations of them as might happen to be formed out of the wreck of the general confederacy, would be subject to those vicissitudes of peace and war, of friendship and enmity with each other, which have fallen to the lot of all neighboring nations, not united under one government, let us enter into a concise detail of some of the consequences that would attend such a situation. So basically saying, like, we know that we're going to fight if we don't form a union, and here's what's going to happen if we do fight, okay? War between the states in the first period of their separate existence would be accompanied with much greater distresses than it commonly is in those countries where regular military establishments have long obtained. The disciplined armies always kept on foot on the continent of Europe, though they bear a malignant aspect to liberty and economy, have, notwithstanding, been productive of the signal advantage of rendering sudden conquests impracticable and of preventing that rapid desolation which used to mark the progress of war prior to their introduction. The art of fortification has contributed to the same ends. The nations of Europe are encircled with chains of fortified places which mutually obstruct invasion. Campaigns are wasted in reducing 2 or 3 frontier garrisons to gain admittance into an enemy's country. Similar impediments occur at every step to exhaust the strength and delay the progress of an invader. Formerly, an invading army would penetrate into the heart of a neighboring country almost as soon as intelligence of its approach could be received. But now a comparatively small force of disciplined troops acting on the defensive with the aid of posts is able to impede and finally to frustrate the enterprises of one much more considerable. The history of war in that quarter of the globe is no longer a history of nations subdued and empires overturned, but of towns taken and retaken, of battles that decide nothing, of retreats more beneficial than victories, of much effort and little acquisition. So he's saying that, like, listen, Europe, they've built forts, they've got whole lines of fortifications and garrisons. When these guys go to war with each other, it's not like they can do much damage, right? They basically fight with each other back and forth, blah, 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 or whatever. That's what he's saying. He's playing a destiny. These are the guys who refused our canvassing help, I think, in one of the states, and turned out 4 canvassers when we had like 300. But I think if somebody can find the picture on Twitter, they have a picture they took of their canvassing event. I think it was like 4 or 5 people that showed up. Why would anyone refuse canvassing help? Because I wasn't pure enough for them. Pretty good. This essay argues for how catastrophic a war would be in the newly formed American Confederates were they to break apart. In this country, the scene would be altogether reversed. The jealousy of military establishments would postpone them as long as possible. The want of fortifications, leaving the frontiers of one state open to another, would facilitate inroads. The populous states would, with little difficulty, overrun their less populous neighbors. Conquest would be as easy to be made as difficult to be retained. War, therefore, would be desultory and predatory. Plunder and devastation ever march in the train of irregulars. The calamities of individuals would make the principal figure in the events which would characterize our military exploits. This picture is not too highly wrought, though I confess it would not long remain a just one. Safety from external danger is the most powerful director of national conduct. Even the ardent love of liberty will, after a time, give way to its dictates. The violent destruction of life and property incident to war, the continual effort and alarm attendant on a state of continual danger, will compel nations the most attached to liberty to resort for repose and security to institutions which have a tendency to destroy their civil and political rights. To be more safe, they at length become more willing to run the risk of being less free. That's a good quote. The institutions chiefly alluded to are standing armies and the correspondent appendages of military establishments. Standing armies, it is said, are not provided against in the new Constitution, and it is therefore inferred that they may exist under it. Their enumerated powers, remember? Their existence, however, from the very terms of the proposition, is, at most, problematical and uncertain. But standing armies, it may be replied, must inevitably result from a dissolution of the Confederacy. Frequent war and constant apprehension, which require a state of as constant preparation, will infallibly produce them. The weaker states or confederacies would first have recourse to them to put themselves upon an equality with their more potent neighbors. They would endeavor to supply the inferiority of population and resources by a more regular and effective system of defense, by disciplined troops and by fortifications. They would at the same time be necessitated to strengthen the executive arm of government, in doing which their constitutions would acquire a progressive direction toward monarchy. It is of the nature of war to increase the executive at the expense of the legislative authority. Basically saying that, like, smaller confederacies would have to become more and more militarized in order to maintain their security against the larger confederacies. Just bad things would happen. The expedients which have been mentioned would soon give the states or confederacies that made use of them a superiority over their neighbors. Small states, or states of less natural strength, under vigorous governments and with the assistance of disciplined armies, have often triumphed over large states, or states of greater natural strength, which have been destitute of these advantages. Neither the pride nor the safety of the more important states or confederacies would permit them long to submit to this mortifying and adventitious superiority. They would quickly resort to means similar to those by which it had been effected to reinstate themselves in their lost preeminence. Thus, we should, in a little time, see established in every part of this country the same engines of despotism which have been the scourge of the old world. This, at least, would be the natural course of things, and our reasonings will be the most likely to be just in proportion as they are accommodated to this standard. So little states will make armies because they're afraid of being conquered by big states. Big states will make armies because they don't want to be conquered by more prepared smaller states, and it's all a big arms race until everybody's fucking each other over, basically. These are not vague inferences drawn from supposed or speculative defects in a constitution, the whole power of which is lodged in the hands of the people, or their representatives and delegates, but they are solid conclusions drawn from the natural and necessary progress of human affairs. It may perhaps be asked, by way of objection to this, why did not standing armies spring up out of the contentions which so often distracted the ancient republics of Greece? Different answers, equally satisfactory, may be given to this question. The industrious habits of the people of the present day, absorbed in the pursuit of gain and devoted to the improvements of agriculture and commerce, are incompatible with the condition of a nation of soldiers, which was the true condition of the people of those republics. The means of revenue, which have been so greatly multiplied by the increase of gold and silver, and of the arts of industry and the science of finance, which is the offspring of modern times, concurring with the habits of nations, have produced an entire revolution in the system of war, and have rendered disciplined armies, distinct from the body of the citizens, the inseparable companions of frequent hostility. I think he's saying that, like, well, so somebody might counter and say, okay, well, hold on, what about like Greece? Like, there were tons of different states and people around here, and they didn't make armies and conquer each other all the time. And he's saying, well, sure, but like back then, like if you were a man who could be in the military, you were probably out farming, or you had to do like other things. But now we've got massive industry, we have multiplicative wealth, we can do so many things. People have way more time to basically become part of military and kill each other, I think, right? There is a wide difference also between military establishments in a country seldom exposed by its situation to internal invasions, and in one which is often subject to them and always apprehensive of them. The rulers of the former can have a good pretext, if they are so inclined, to keep on foot armies so numerous as must of necessity be maintained in the latter. These armies being, in the first case, rarely, if at all, called into activity for interior defense, the people are in no danger of being broken to military subordination. The laws are not accustomed to relaxations. Greece at this point was under Ottoman control. Greece was seen in an idealized realm of type of... Oh, gotcha, okay. In favor of military exigencies, the civil state remains in full vigor, neither corrupted nor confounded with the principles or propensities of the other state. The smallness of the army renders the natural strength of the community an overmatch for it, and the citizens, not habituated to look up to the military power for protection or to submit to its oppressions, neither love nor fear the soldiery. They view them with a spirit of jealous acquiescence in a necessary evil and stand ready to resist a power which they suppose may be exerted to the prejudice of their rights. The army under such circumstances may usefully aid the magistrate to suppress a small faction or an occasional mob or insurrection, but it will be unable to enforce encroachments against the united efforts of the great body of the people. So basically, like, I think this is just talking about it would be impossible to keep a small army to maintain the population because people wouldn't be happy if there was a big army and a small army wouldn't be able to stop the people from rebelling or whatever. I guess. I don't know. It's kind of what this is talking about. We're almost done with this. Fuck, hold on. Peace Coast coming. 5 paragraphs. 4. In a country in the predicament last described, the contrary of all this happens. The perpetual menacings of danger oblige the government to be always prepared to repel it. Its armies must be numerous enough for instant defense. So this is saying, so the country would keep a much larger army to be able to fight off insurrecting population. The continual necessity for their services enhances the importance of the soldier and proportionally degrades the condition of the citizen. The military state becomes elevated above the civil. The inhabitants of territories, often the theater of war, are unavoidably subjected to frequent infringements on their rights, which serve to weaken their sense of those rights, and by degrees the people are brought to consider the soldiery not only as their protectors but as their superiors. The transition from this disposition to that of considering them masters is neither remote nor difficult, but it is very difficult to prevail upon a people under such impressions to make a bold or effectual resistance to usurpation supported by the military power. The kingdom of Great Britain falls within the first description. An insular situation and a powerful marine guarding it in a great measure against the possibility of foreign invasion supersede the necessity of a numerous army within the kingdom. A sufficient force to make head against a sudden descent till the militia could have time to rally and embody is all that has been deemed requisite. No motive of national policy is demanded, nor would public opinion have tolerated a larger number of troops upon its domestic establishment. There has been for a long time past little room for the operation of the other causes, which has been enumerated as the consequences of internal war. This peculiar felicity of situation has, in a great degree, contributed to preserve the liberty which that country to this day enjoys, in spite of the prevalent venality and corruption. If, on the contrary, Britain had been situated on the continent and had been compelled, as she would have been by that situation, to make her military establishments at home coextensive with those of the other great powers of Europe, she, like them, would in all probability be at this day a victim to the absolute power of a single man. 'Tis possible, though not easy, that the people of that island may be enslaved from other causes, but it cannot be by the prowess of an army so inconsiderable as that which has been usually kept up within the kingdom. Sorry, I'm almost done here. So because Britain is one of the things, the island of Great Britain has unified into a single country. They don't have to keep like all these internal armies to fight with each other and all this. And because of their unity, the people enjoy basically more freedoms and are being stripped from them as a result of having to keep a giant military state, basically. If we are wise enough to preserve the Union, we may for ages enjoy an advantage similar to that of an insulated. Europe is at a great distance from us. Her colonies in our vicinity will be likely to continue too much disproportion in strength to be able to give us any dangerous annoyance. Extensive military establishment cannot, in this position, be necessary to our security. But if we should be disunited and the integral parts should either remain separated or, which is most probable, should be thrown together into 2 or 3 confederacies, we should be, in a short course of time, in the predicament of the continental powers of Europe. Our liberties would be a prey to the means of defending ourselves against the ambition and jealousy of each other. This is an idea not superficial or futile, but solid and weighty. It deserves the most serious and mature consideration of every prudent and honest man of whatever party. If such men will make a firm and solemn pause, and meditate dispassionately on the importance of this interesting idea, if they will contemplate it in all its attitudes and trace it to all its consequences, they will not hesitate to part with trivial objections to a constitution, the rejection of which would, in all probability, put a final period to the Union. The airy phantoms that flit before the distempered imaginations of some of its adversaries would quickly give place to the more substantial forms of dangers, real, certain, and formidable. Jesus. This is number 8. If states were constantly warring with one another and had larger armies, then freedoms of its citizens would necessarily be curtailed, and the soldiery and militaries would be seen as superior to the ordinary citizens, and the states would be dedicating a large amount of the resources and leadership to simply maintaining their militaries. Nice. Mike from PA unbanned. Cute. Okay. Well, I want to at least do these guys today. Federalist Paper 9 and 10. Apparently these are where they start to kind of get interesting. Who's on anything else tonight? Big car YouTuber guy and me and Dan. Okay. Bring people for disagreements today. Tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow we will. The utility of the Union as a safeguard against domestic faction and insurrection. This one is authored again by Alexander Hamilton. A firm union will be of the utmost moment to the peace and liberty of the states as a barrier against domestic faction and insurrection. It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the distractions with which they were continually agitated, and at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy. If they exhibit occasional calms, these only serve as short-lived contrast to the furious storms that are to succeed. If now and then intervals of felicity open to view, we behold them with a mixture of regret, arising from the reflection that the pleasing scenes before us are soon to be overwhelmed by the tempestuous waves of sedition and party rage. If momentary rays of glory break forth from the gloom, while they dazzle us with the transient and fleeting brilliancy, they at the same time admonish us to lament that the vices of government should pervert the direction and tarnish the luster of those bright talents and exalted endowments for which the favored soils that produce them have been so justly celebrated. Jesus. All this to say that republics like Greece and Italy fought all the fucking time, and if there was moments of peace, you were only catching your breath for the next war. From the disorders that disfigure the annals of those republics, the advocates of despotism have drawn arguments not only against the forms of republican government, but against the very principles of civil liberty. They have decried all free government as inconsistent with the order of society and have indulged themselves in malicious exultation over its friends and partisans. Happily for mankind, stupendous fabrics reared on the basis of liberty, which have flourished for ages, have, in a few glorious instances, refuted their gloomy sophisms. And I trust America will be the broad and solid foundation of other edifices, not less magnificent, which will be equally permanent monuments of their errors. America will be different. We will have a strong republic that doesn't fight all the time, I guess. But it is not to be denied that the portraits they have sketched of Republican government were just copies of the originals from which they were taken. If it had been found impracticable to have devised models of a more perfect structure, the enlightened friends to liberty would have been obliged to abandon the cause of that species of government as indefensible. The science of politics, however, like most other sciences, has received great improvement. The efficacy of various principles is now well understood, which were either not known at all or imperfectly known to the ancients. The regular, basically saying that like government has existed, and sure, republics have been fucked in the past. However, we can learn from those republics, and we will, and we'll do that and make a more perfect government. The regular distribution of power into distinct departments, the introduction of legislative balances and checks, the institution of courts composed of judges holding their offices during good behavior, the representation of the people in the legislature by deputies of their own election. These are wholly new discoveries, or have made their principal progress towards perfection in modern times. They are means, and powerful means, by which the excellences of Republican government may be retained and its imperfections lessened or avoided. To this catalog of circumstances that tend to the amelioration of popular systems of civil government, I shall venture, however novel it may appear to some, to add one more on a principle which has been made the foundation of an objection to the new Constitution. I mean the enlargement of the orbit within which such systems are to revolve, either in respect to the dimensions of a single state or to the consolidation of several smaller states into one great confederacy. The latter is that which immediately concerns the object under consideration. It will, however, be of use to examine the principle in its application to a single state, which shall be attended to in another place. Talking about how like this concept of government can encapsulate state governments and the federal government, I think, right? Is basically what he's talking about here. It's real. Ben Shapiro. Hi, I'm a political asylum seeker since 2016. I'm still in the process, so I'm fucked up to the election. I have a few thoughts about how oligarchs are taking over the U.S., particularly about Twitch and Bezos. Please hit me up if you want to chat. Sure thing, buddy. The utility of confederacy, as well to suppress faction and to guard the internal tranquility of states as to increase their external force and security, is in reality not a new idea. It is, I think, confederacy, might, like, in particular mean a union of separate governments. It might be, I think in this year at this time, that's what we mean when we say confederacy. A confederacy is a political union of states, countries, organizations that are joined together for a common purpose or interest. Yeah, okay. So a confederacy, it's more than just like one giant government that encompasses everybody. It's more that a confederacy is like a union of states, basically, right? It has been practiced upon in different countries and ages and has received the sanction of the most approved writers on the subject of politics. The opponents of the plan proposed have, with great assiduity, cited and circulated the observations on the necessity of a contracted territory for a republican government.
Assiduity.
But they seem not to have been apprised of the sentiments of that great man expressed in another part of his work, nor to have averted to the consequences of the principle to which they subscribe with such ready acquiescence. When Montesquieu, I don't know how to pronounce this fucker's name. When Montesquieu recommends a small extent for republics, the standards he had in view were of dimensions far short of the limits of almost every one of these states. Neither Virginia, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, North Carolina, nor Georgia can by any means be compared with the models from which he reasoned and to which the terms of his description apply. If we therefore take his ideas on this point as the criterion of truth, we shall be driven to the alternative either of taking refuge at once in the arms of monarchy, or of splitting ourselves into an infinity of little, jealous, clashing, tumultuous commonwealths, the wretched nurseries of unceasing discord, and the miserable objects of universal pity or contempt. I think he's saying that when this Montesquieu guy, I don't know anything about this guy, political theory, but it sounds like this guy probably spoke about forming republics, but those republics would have been for smaller states or populations than any of the states that already existed. So if it works in these larger states, then hey, why not make it work in the U.S., I guess? Maybe. I think that's what is being implied here. Some of the writers who have come forward on the other side of the question seem to have been aware of the dilemma and have even been bold enough to hint at the division of the larger states as a desirable thing. Such an infatuated policy, such a desperate expedient, might, by the multiplication of petty offices, answer the views of men who possess not qualifications to extend their influence beyond the narrow circles of personal intrigue, but it could never promote the greatness or happiness of the people of America. Referring the examination of the principle itself to another place, as has been already mentioned, it will be sufficient to remark here that, in the sense of the author, who has been most emphatically quoted upon the occasion, it would only dictate a reduction of the size of the more considerable members of the Union, but would not militate against their being all comprehended in one confederate government. And this is the true question in the discussion of which we are at present interested. So far are the suggestions of Montesquieu from standing in opposition to a general union of the states that he explicitly treats of a confederate republic as the expedient for extending the sphere of popular government and reconciling the advantages of monarchy with those of republicanism. It is very probable, says he, that mankind would have been obliged at length to live constantly under the government of a single person, had they not contrived a kind of constitution that has all of the internal advantages of a republican, together with the external force of a monarchical government, a confederate republic. This form of government is a convention by which several smaller states agree to become members of a larger one, which they intend to form. It is a kind of assemblage of societies that constitute a new one, capable of increasing by means of new associations till they arrive to such a degree of power as to be able to provide for the security of the united body. A republic of this kind, able to withstand an external force, may support itself without any internal corruptions. The form of this society prevents all manner of inconveniences. If a single member should attempt to usurp the supreme authority, he could not be supposed to have an equal authority and credit in all the confederate states. Were he to have too great influence over one, this would alarm the rest. Were he to subdue a part, which would still remain free, might oppose him with forces independent of those which he had usurped and overpower him before he could be settled in his usurpation. Should a popular insurrection happen in one of the Confederate states, the others are able to quell it. Should abuses creep into one part, they are reformed by those that remain sound. The state may be destroyed on one side and not on the other. The Confederacy may be dissolved, and the Confederates preserve their sovereignty. As this government is composed of small republics, it enjoys the internal happiness of each, and with respect to its external situation, it is possessed by means of the association of all the advantages of large monarchies. So basically, I think that what they're trying to balance out is that, it sounds like, and again, my world history and U.S. history around this time period especially, it's not really that great, but it sounds like, I guess at this time, when people talk about republics are kind of like these small city-states, or they're just not like huge countries. Your big countries are your monarchies, right? Your kings with all this land or whatever. And it's okay, well, how do we do republics but have all the power of large, kingdoms that are ruled by monarchies? And so, well, what if we just take republics and we make republics out of the republics, right? That would be sick. We could just have all the republics make a big republic, and that could have all the strength and power of a monarchy while still affording us all of the protections and freedoms of the civil protections and freedoms of a republic, is essentially what they're arguing about, or what he's kind of going back and forth about here. I have thought it proper to quote at length these interesting passages because they contain a luminous abridgment of the principal arguments in favor of the Union, and must effectually remove the false impressions which a misapplication of other parts of the work was calculated to make. They have, at the same time, an intimate connection with the more immediate design of this paper, which is to illustrate the tendency of the Union to repress domestic faction and insurrection. A distinction, more subtle than accurate, has been raised between a confederacy and a consolidation of the states. The essential characteristic of the first is said to be the restriction of its authority to the members in their collective capacities, without reaching to the individuals of whom they are composed. It is contended that the National Council ought to have no concern with any object of internal administration. An exact equality of suffrage between the members has also been insisted upon as a leading feature of a Confederate government. These positions are, in the main, arbitrary. They are supported neither by principle nor precedent. Basically, what he's talking about up here is there's a difference between just making a giant government and a government of governments, right? The government of governments would be people from Nebraska and from Iowa and from California. Well, here it would be Virginia, Georgia, whatever, would come together, and they would only be concerned with the United States of America. They're the federal government, and they're only concerned with the health and safety and security of the federal state, the United States of America. And so they'd only worry about federal administration. And it would be the state governments that would deal with state issues, right? So there's a difference between a confederacy of the states into a republic that represents republics versus a consolidation of all the states into one singular government that's trying to administer to all the individual people from a federal government, right? It has indeed happened that governments of this kind have generally operated in the manner which the distinction taken notice of supposes to be inherent in their nature, but there have been in most of them extensive exceptions to the practice which serve to prove, as far as example will go, that there is no absolute rule on the subject. And it will be clearly shown in the course of this investigation that as far as the principle contended for has prevailed, it has been the cause of incurable disorder and imbecility in the government. talking about equality of suffrage between the members, so equality of suffrage, basically equal rights between the different members of the union, and I guess he's going to talk about like how to figure this out, I guess. The definition of a confederate republic seems simply to be an assemblage of societies or an association of two or more states into one state. The extent, modifications, and objects of the federal authority are mere matters of discretion. So long as the separate organization of the members be not abolished, so long as it exists by a constitutional necessity for local purposes, though it should be in perfect subordination to the general authority of the Union, it would still be, in fact and in theory, an association of states or a confederacy. The proposed Constitution, so far from implying an abolition of the state governments, makes them constituent parts of the national sovereignty by allowing them a direct representation in the Senate and leaves in their possession certain exclusive and very important portions of sovereign power. This fully corresponds in every rational import of the terms with the idea of a federal government. In the Lycian Confederacy, which consisted of 23 cities or republics, the largest were entitled to 3 votes in the Common Council, those of the middle class to 2, and the smallest to 1. The Common Council had the appointment of all the judges and magistrates of the respective cities. This was certainly the most delicate species of interference in their internal administration, for if there be any that seem exclusively appropriated to the local jurisdictions, it is the appointment of their own officers. Yet Montesquieu, speaking of this association, says, were I to give a model of an excellent Confederate republic, it would be that of Lycia. Thus we perceive that the distinctions insisted upon were not within the contemplation of this enlightened civilian, and we shall be led to conclude that they are the novel refinements of an erroneous theory. This is harder for me to understand. So here is an issue that he's talking about with, I don't know with this Lycia, I don't know anything about this history, but it sounds like Lycia had a confederacy that had basically a federal government, their confederacy. However, this common council was apparently appointing people inside the cities, which is a delicate species of interference and their internal administration. It'd be the same as like Congress appointing judges in a state instead of federal judges, which I imagine he would say is bad, right? Well, okay, I'm sorry. I understand more. Hamilton is, he's shitting on Montesquieu. It sounds like, again, I don't know anything about this. Take everything I say here. It sounds like this Montesquieu guy is probably one of the most well-known authors at the time, I guess, speaking of republics. But it sounds like what Hamilton wants to do is Hamilton wants to go, Montesquieu had some really good ideas that I'm going to borrow from, that he quotes at length. However, Montesquieu is also kind of a primitive retard. For instance, he said that Lycia was a great confederacy, okay? However, the federal government of Lycia was literally appointing local judges. That's fucking retarded, okay? So listen, all right? This guy's not a god. He has some good ideas. We're going to take those ideas. But he was also like fucking crazy on some things, because what could be more important, right? If there be anything that seems exclusively appropriated to the local jurisdictions, it must be the appointment of their own officers. Yet Montesquieu, being the primitive retard he is, says, well, if I was to give a 5-star rating to any Confederate republic, it would be Lycia. Thus we perceive, so now we understand that Montesquieu did make distinctions, right, when he was thinking about things, but he wasn't making these distinctions as an enlightened civilian, rather kind of retarded sometimes, is basically, I think, what Hamilton is kind of arguing here. Okay, so if we were to notes all of this, Hamilton quotes at length from Montesquieu, speaks about and argues about the strength of confederacies, differentiates between confederacies of states versus dissolving states into a single unified government. Also critiques Montesquieu, demonstrating that even though he was a good source of intellectual, political, philosophical thought, he was not perfect. So the framers of the new Constitution had the ability to improve upon some of his ideas. Okay, good enough. Okay. Hamilton and company were obsessed with Greek and Roman democracies. They wanted to understand how and where the systems failed to... Yeah, they're going through a lot of the historical, and the monarchs too, right? Yeah. Okay. Now we get our boy Matty in here, okay? I don't think we've read anything from him yet. Have we? Nope. Just Hamilton and John Jay. How is the appointment of these local magistrates different from appointing federal judges to administer federal law within states? Because federal judges only administer when there are matters of federal law. But unless there's a really compelling reason, the states will have jurisdiction inside the states of people breaking the law within states. So the federal government cannot appoint your state judges. Your state does that. That's who you vote for. A lot of what is being written is in response to historical events and Locke and Hobbes. Yeah, there's all these nerds. If you want to read their shit, would probably give you more context as well. But we don't have time to read the source of every single thing ever from the fucking pyramids onwards. Okay. James Madison. Among us. I don't remember this. To the people of the state of New York. Among the numerous advantages promised by a well-constructed union, none deserves to be more accurately developed than its tendency to break and control the violence of faction. The friend of popular governments never finds himself so much alarmed for their character and fate as when he contemplates their propensity to this dangerous vice. He will not fail, therefore, to set a due value on any plan which, without violating the principles to which he is attached, provides a proper cure for it. So basically, how do we stop factions and breaking down without taking away all of our rights? The instability, injustice, and confusion introduced into the public councils have, in truth, been the mortal diseases under which popular governments have everywhere perished, as they continue to be the favorite and fruitful topics from which the adversaries to liberty derive their most specious declamations. The valuable improvements made by the American constitutions on the popular models, both ancient and modern, cannot certainly be too much admired, but it would be an unwarrantable partiality to contend that they have as effectually obviated the danger on this side as was wished and expected. So the American system, so far, all the state governments have improved on things, but it's not perfect yet, right? Complaints are everywhere heard from our most considerate and virtuous citizens, equally the friends of public and private faith, and of public and personal liberty, that our governments are too unstable, that the public good is disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties, and that measures are too often decided not according to the rules of justice and the rights of the minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority. However anxiously we may wish that these complaints had no foundation, the evidence of known facts will not permit us to deny that they are in some degree true. It will be found, indeed, on a candid review of our situation, that some of the distresses under which we labor have been erroneously charged on the operation of our governments, but it will be found, at the same time, that other causes will not alone account for many of our heaviest misfortunes, and, particularly, for that prevailing and increasing distrust of public and alarm for private rights which are echoed from one end of the continent to the other. These must be chiefly, if not wholly, effects of the unsteadiness and injustice with which a factious spirit has tainted our public administrations. Basically, like, if we're being honest with ourselves, there's some issues, we got to fix it, I think, right? Right. By a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. These are two methods of curing the mischiefs of faction, the one by removing its causes, the other by controlling its effects. There are again two methods of removing the causes of faction, the one by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence, and the other by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests. It could never be more truly said than of the first remedy that it is worse than the disease. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an aliment without which it instantly expires, but it could not be less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish the annihilation of air, which is essential to animal life because it imparts to fire its destructive agency. The second expedient is as impracticable as the first would be unwise. As long as the reason of man continues fallible and he is at liberty to exercise it, different opinions will be formed. As long as the connection subsists between his reason and his self-love, his opinions and his passions will have a reciprocal influence on each other, and the former will be objects to which the latter will attach themselves. So he's saying, like, how do we get rid of factions? Well, there's two ways to do it. We can either get rid of the reasons for why people have different opinions, or we can just make sure everybody has the same opinion. So So to get rid of why people might have different opinions, like the causes of faction, we would have to eliminate all liberty and basically crack down. And like, obviously we can't do that. It'd be horrible. Or we could just make it so everybody has the same opinion, but as long as there are two minds, there will be two opinions. That will never happen, right? The diversity in the faculties of men from which the rights of property originate is not less an insuperable obstacle to a uniformity of interests. The protection of these faculties is the first object of government. From the protection of different and unequal faculties of acquiring property, the possession of different degrees and kinds of property immediately results, and from the influence of these on the sentiments and views of the respective proprietors ensues a division of the society into different interests and parties. The latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, and we see them everywhere brought into different degrees of activity, according to the different circumstances of civil society. A zeal for different opinions concerning religion, concerning government, and many other points, as well as speculation as of practice, an attachment to different leaders ambitiously contending for preeminence and power, or to persons of other descriptions whose fortunes have been interesting to the human passions, have, in turn, divided mankind into parties, inflamed them with mutual animosity, and rendered them much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for their common good. So strong is this propensity of mankind to fall into mutual animosities that where no substantial occasion presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and excite their most violent conflicts. Basically, people will always faction against each other. Even when there's no reason to faction each other, people will faction against each other because that's just what people do. But the most common and durable source of factions has been the various and unequal distribution of property. Those who hold and those who are without property have ever formed distinct interests in society. Those who are creditors and those who are debtors fall under a like discrimination. A landed interest, a manufacturing interest, a mercantile interest, a moneyed interest, with many lesser interests, grow up of necessity in civilized nations and divide them into different classes, actuated by different sentiments and views. The regulation of these various and interfering interests forms the principal task of modern legislation and involves the spirit of party and faction in the necessary and ordinary operations of the government. No man is allowed to be a judge in his own cause because his interest would certainly bias his judgment and, not improbably, corrupt his integrity. With equal, nay, with greater reason, a body of men are unfit to be both judges and parties at the same time. Yet what are many of the most important acts of legislation, but so many judicial determinations, not indeed concerning the rights of single persons, but concerning the rights of large bodies of citizens? And what are the different classes of legislators, but advocates and parties to the causes which they determine? Is a law proposed concerning private debts? It is a question to which the creditors are parties on one side and the debtors on the other. Justice ought to hold the balance between them, yet the parties are and must be themselves the judges, and the most numerous party, or in other words, the most powerful faction, must be expected to prevail. Shall domestic manufacturers be encouraged, and in what degree, by restrictions on foreign manufacturers? Are questions which would be differently decided by the landed and the manufacturing classes, and probably by neither with a sole regard to justice and the public good. The appointment, basically, we're just talking about how, obviously we all have to make decisions about ourselves and society, but we are ourselves. So how can we exercise judgment over ourselves when our judgment would surely be biased, and a biased and corrupt judgment would lead to unjust decisions, basically, right? The apportionment of taxes on the various descriptions of property is an act which seems to require the most exact impartiality, yet there is, perhaps, no legislative act in which greater opportunity and temptation are given to a predominant party to trample on the rules of justice. Every shilling with which they overburden the inferior number is a shilling saved to their own pockets. It is in vain to say that enlightened statesmen will be able to adjust these clashing interests and render them all subservient to the public good. Enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm, nor in many cases can such an adjustment be made at all without taking into view indirect and remote considerations, which will rarely prevail over the immediate interest which one party may find in disregarding the rights of another or the good of the whole. We can't rely on just good politicians to fix this, so my guess is he's going to make an argument for structure, right? The interference to which we are brought, that the causes of faction cannot be removed, and that relief is only to be sought in the means of controlling its effects. If a faction consists of less than a majority, relief is supplied by the Republican principle, which enables the majority to defeat its sinister views by regular vote. It may clog the administration, it may convulse the society, but it will be unable to execute and mask its violence under the forms of the Constitution. When a majority is included in a faction, the form of popular government, on the other hand, enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passion or interest both the public good and the rights of other citizens. So basically saying that, like, well, if the minority is trying to do bad things, then the majority defeats it. Easy. But when the majority is trying to do bad things, popular government makes it so the majority can do really bad things, like slavery, which they would go on to do. To secure the public good and private rights against the dangers of such a faction, and at the same time to preserve the spirit and the form of popular government, is then the great object to which our inquiries are directed. Let me add that it is the great desideratum by which this form of government can be rescued from the opprobrium under which it has so long labored, and be recommended to the esteem and adoption of mankind. Jesus.
Desideratum.
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 Desideratum. It is the great need by which this form of government can be rescued from the opprobrium.
Opprobrium.
Harsh text or sister. It's long labored and be recommended to the esteem and adoption of mankind. Jesus. By what means is this object attainable? Evidently by one of two only. Either the existence of the same passion or interest in a majority at the same time must be prevented, or the majority, having such coexistent passion or interest, must be rendered, by their number and local situation, unable to concert and carry into effect schemes of oppression. If the impulse and the opportunity be suffered to coincide, we well know that neither moral nor religious motives can be relied on as an adequate control. They are not found to be such on the injustice and violence of individuals, and lose their efficacy in proportion to the number combined together, that is, in proportion as their efficacy becomes needful. From this view of the subject, it may be concluded that a pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person, can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. A common passion or interest will, in almost every case, be felt by a majority of the whole. A communication and concert result from the form of government itself, and there is nothing to check the inducements to sacrifice the weaker party or an obnoxious individual. Hence, it is that such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Theoretic politicians who have patronized this species of government have erroneously supposed that by reducing mankind to a perfect equality in their political rights, they would, at the same time, be perfectly equalized and assimilated in their possessions, their opinions, and their passions. A republic basically saying that, like, okay, well, a pure democratic mob rule government could work if literally every single person had the exact same beliefs and opinions and rights and everything, right? Obviously, it's not possible, right? A republic, by which I mean a government in which the scheme of representation takes place, opens a different prospect and promises the cure for which we are seeking. Let us examine the points in which it varies from pure democracy, and we shall comprehend both the nature of the cure and the efficacy which it must derive from the union. The two great points of difference between a democracy and a republic are, first, the delegation of the government, in the latter to a small number of citizens elected by the rest. Secondly, the greater number of citizens, the greater sphere of country over which the latter may be extended. The effect of the first difference is, on the one hand, to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of their country, and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations. Under such a regulation, it may well happen that the public voice, pronounced by the representatives of the people, will be more consonant to the public good than if pronounced by the people themselves, convened for the purpose. So the first argument is that a representative, like a republic, is going to be a bit tempered by public opinion because it's a smaller number of people making a decision. They might not all be necessarily impassioned like all of their constituents would be, I guess. On the other hand, the effect may be inverted. Men of factious tempers, of local prejudices, or of sinister designs may, by intrigue, by corruption, or by other means, first obtain the suffrages and then betray the interests of the people. The question resulting is whether small or extensive republics are more favorable to the election of proper guardians of the public weal, and it is clearly decided in favor of the latter by two obvious considerations. Okay, so you could have a smaller group of men who might ignore their constituents who are being evil because the constituents are, held captive by their passions, but also a small group of people could just be corrupt. So maybe we need a larger group of people, and we're going to decide that with these arguments. In the first place, it is to be remarked that, wait, hold on, I should take notes as we do this instead of trying to do it all at the end. Jesus, Hamilton argues in favor of in favor of a structured republic that can protect rights. That can protect rights more effectively, appear more effectively, pure democracy, and explores some of the arguments against. Wait, sorry, this is Madison, not Hamilton. Explores means by which a government can fight against the tyranny of a corrupt majority or a sinister minority, I guess. In the first place, it is to be remarked that, however small the republic may be, the representatives must be raised to a certain number in order to guard against the cabals of a few, and that, however large it may be, they must be limited to a certain number in order to guard against the confusion of a multitude. Hence, the number of representatives in the two cases not being in proportion to that of the two constituents, and being proportionally greater in the small republic, it follows that, if the proportion of fit characters be not less in the large than in the small republic, the former will present a greater option and consequently a greater probability of a fit choice. Hence, the number of representatives in the two cases not being in proportion to that of the two constituents, and being proportionally greater small republic, it follows that if the proportion of fit characters be not less in the large small republic, the former will present a greater option and consequently a greater probability of a fit choice. Okay, so it's talking about how this are we making an argument kind of for the Senate here? The number of representatives in the two cases not being in proportion to that of the two constituents and being proportionally greater in the small republic. That if you have a confederacy of republics, you want to have the small republic will be proportionally greater in representation. It follows that if the proportion of fit characters be not less in the large, small, the former present a greater option, a greater probability of a fit choice. Okay, I think, maybe, right? No, wait. It's the number of representatives in the two cases not being in proportion to that of the two constituents. It follows that if the proportion of fit characters be not less than the large, I think, maybe? I'll keep reading. In the next place, as each representative will be chosen by a greater number of citizens in the large than in the small republic, it will be more difficult for unworthy candidates to practice with success the vicious arts by which elections are too often carried, and the suffrages of the people, being more free, will be more likely to center in men who possess the most attractive merit and the most diffuse and established characters. Well, I think it might be talking about the fitness also of like larger states will elect better people because they have more people to choose from, I think, as well, right? It must be confessed that in this, as in most other cases, there is a mean on both sides of which inconveniences will be found to lie. By enlarging too much the number of electors, you render the representatives too little acquainted with all their local circumstances and lesser interests, as by reducing it too much, you render him unduly attached to these, and too little fit to comprehend and pursue great and national objects. The federal constitution forms a happy combination in this respect, the great and aggregate interests being referred to the national, the local, and particular to the state legislatures. The other point of difference is the greater number of citizens and extent of territory which may be brought within the compass of Republican than of Democratic government, and it is this circumstance principally which renders factious combinations less to be dreaded in the former than the latter. Hold on. The greater number of citizens and territory which may be brought within the compass of Republican than of Democratic government, and it is this circumstance principally which renders factious combinations less to be dreaded in the former than in the latter. So you can bring more and more citizens and states into like this Republican form of government because you're not just enlarging massively the size of a single state, I'm guessing, basically. The smaller the society, the fewer probably will be the distinct parties and interests composing it. The fewer the distinct parties and interests, the more frequently will a majority be found of the same party, and the smaller the number of individuals composing a majority, and the smaller the compass within which they are placed, the more easily will they concert and execute their plans of oppression. Extend the sphere, and you take in a greater variety of parties and interests, you make it less probable that a majority of the whole will have a common motive to invade the rights of other citizens, or if such a common motive exists, it will be more difficult for all who feel it to discover their own strength and act in unison with each other. Besides other impediments, it may be remarked that where there is a consciousness of unjust or dishonorable purposes, communication is always checked by distrust in proportion to the number whose concurrence is necessary. Bigger, obviously larger bodies with larger representation is probably less a chance of being corrupt than super small bodies, I guess, right? Hence, it clearly appears that the same advantage which a republic has over a democracy in controlling the effects of faction is enjoyed by a large over a small republic, is enjoyed by the union over the states composing it. Does the advantage consist in the substitution of representatives whose enlightened views and virtuous sentiments render them superior to local prejudices and schemes of injustice? It will not be denied that the representation of the Union will be most likely to possess these requisite endowments. Does it consist in the greater security afforded by a greater variety of parties against the event of any one party being able to outnumber and oppress the rest? And in equal degree, does the increased variety of parties comprised within the Union increase the security? Does it, in fine, consist in the greater obstacle opposed in the concert and accomplishment of the secret wishes of an unjust and interested majority? Here again, the extent of the Union gives it the most palpable advantage. The influence of factious leaders may kindle a flame within their particular states, but will be unable to spread a general conflagration through the other states. A religious sect may degenerate into a political faction in a part of the Confederacy, but the variety of sects dispersed over the entire face of it must secure the national councils against any danger from that source. A rage for paper money, for an abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked project, no fiat currency, no socialism, will be less apt to pervade the whole body of the Union than a particular member of it, in the same proportion as such a malady is more likely to taint a particular county or district than an entire state.
Malady.
In the extent and proper structure of the Union, therefore, we behold a Republican remedy for the diseases most incident to Republican government, and according to the degree of pleasure and pride we feel in being Republicans ought to be our zeal in cherishing the spirit and supporting the character of Federalists. Jesus, it's fucking wordy. I think this is basically just arguing for the idea that like a large federal government with an appropriate number of people representing it can guard against all of those factious and crazy, wacky things that might happen on the smaller state level, I think, basically, right? Okay.